residential uses above, specifically in the two larger buildings located along 23rd Avenue. The site has been designed to accommodate the parking on a short and longer-term basis with surface stalls and underground stalls. The development is also consistent with the vision, principles, and big moves of urban design standards and the official community plan and associated policies. The rezoning will allow for the redevelopment of this site as a higher density, mixed-use property while understanding the unique characteristics of the site in the community context. The facade of the buildings at grade provide a good rhythm at the street level to potentially accommodate several commercial uses with various entry points. The residential lobbies on 23rd will establish that side of the site as primarily residential, utilizing the entrances, lobbies, and associated drop-off lay-by areas in that interface. And the use of high-quality facade materials, glazing, and large canopies will also reinforce this public realm as a unique residential address, having a distinct character within the overall site. The edge along Hillsdale also has a unique character as the smaller building's restaurant patio and plaza will invite customers into the site from the west.
You have about 1 minute to go.
1 minute. Okay. I'll skip a little bit here. Okay. I'll go right to the The landscape conceptual details are intended to provide buffers and as visual complements to some of the mature landscapes on the adjacent existing sites to the east and the north. And the plan provides exciting new edge conditions and plaza pedestrian areas along Hillsdale and 23rd. In addition, the pedestrian paths and nodes within the site are also enhanced to provide clear and visible sidewalks and connections. In closing, Harvard would like to emphasize our commitment to the City of Regina. We've operated our head office in this city for 113 years. We have a strong history of investing time, money, and people here. And over half a century ago, our family believed in developing this site south of Wascana Lake, south of downtown, even before there was a bridge connecting it to the downtown. It was known as Regina Shoppers Mall in the community of Hillsdale. Through many evolutions, including the operation of a recreational fitness club, Lakeshore Mall has remained highly visible and somewhat endearing place to go. This application before you today represents a continuation of that legacy to continue to build upon a vibrant neighborhood and create a sense of place. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Dowell.
Thanks, Your Worship. Good evening. So in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce this report, and you're going to help me do that now by answering a few questions, if you don't mind. So let's begin with the notion there was a service station there, and so it would have been a contaminated piece of property. Would you describe what happened and where that's at now, please?
When the Shell station made the decision, through the chair, when the Shell station made the decision to leave the site, within the context of their lease, they had full responsibility to remediate the site to residential standard, and they did do that. And we have certificates that have been submitted to support that.
Very good, thanks. There is a, there was a grocery store there now. Yes. Would you suggest in the future that could be a possibility?
We have two grocery stores that we are talking to right now that are very excited about how this area has really developed as a vibrant residential area. And we think it is a possibility, but we're not down that leasing path.
Yep, thanks.
Yet.
I'm a little curious about finishes. So my friends on Planning Commission talked to me a little bit about how buildings look and feel, and the finishes and the effect that has. So can I get you to comment on, because you addressed this a little bit in your comments, what does that mean to me as a normal folk who doesn't understand this?
Well, I'm going to defer to my esteemed colleague here.
Well, through the chair, the preliminary design that really supports the land use redesignation that's before council today is based upon the fact of trying to create high quality finishes for the project. And by high quality, we mean a combination of natural materials, which include stone, lower maintenance materials, could be some wood portions to complement some of the existing surrounding communities, and obviously a lot of glazing in terms of the uses that would be present there. So both the retail and residential would require a substantial amount of glazing, and the glazing itself would be fairly clear glazing for both visibility in and also visibility out from the tenants and the homeowners. So good quality materials all throughout that would again be reflective and consistent with the surrounding community that they would face onto as well.
Perfect. Thanks very much. When we were at Planning Commission, we heard a little bit about buffers and so on between existing residents and what's going on around there. Can I get you to elaborate a little bit about how you will treat the area where, let's say, you buffer against residents?
Through the chair. We have a preliminary landscape design which contemplates an extensive amount of foliage appropriate to creating visible buffers and noise buffers, although we don't feel that there is going to be significant noise buffers required. We're also contemplating access points for those residents to be able to walk into the site with clear pathways and appropriate seating and landscaping around those pathways. And obviously we're going to be looking towards how we enhance the fencing along those interfaces as well. And did you, Vince, you want to add something here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, through the chair, it's been covered off in Ms. Hill's descriptions, but there would be a combination of landscaping which would be appropriate for street frontages, which would promote active shading and visibility through to the retail. Completely different types of landscaping, which would be buffering and enhancing this very significant and very mature landscaping that exists along the residential buffers that exist there today. So it's a combination of adding to the streetscape and enhancing the current buffers that exist within the residential community. So, thank you. Yeah, perhaps as a little clarification on that, in terms of the landscape setback, the current land use requires a reduced setback from what's being proposed. We're proposing a minimum of 10 meters or just about 33 feet of separation, which would be fully landscaped from the building face to the residential property lines.
I appreciate that. Thanks. The discussion just before you, previous delegation, was a little bit about that connectivity between the park and the street. Can I get you to provide your commentary on that, please?
Absolutely. That amenity across the street is one of the most important aspects of this redevelopment, and so we have as much an interest as Wascana Centre Authority to see that it is a well-used and beautiful place to go and walk through. Our thought was that we would work together, not thought, we have an agreement to work together to create a very striking and beautiful and exciting entryway on both sides with all the hard and softscape materials that Bernadette had referenced. A very inviting gateway piece, and that Harvard, as a major stakeholder, will play a leadership role in ensuring that over the period of time of development that we support and work with Wascana Centre Authority and other stakeholders to make sure that that the pathway and that area gets developed.
Thanks very much. One other question I heard in your comments is about the number of units, and I think you left a little flexibility there as to number. Can I get you to comment on that, please? Residential units, sorry.
Through the chair. The detailed design has not been finalized yet, and in our preliminary research there were a number of interested potential prospects that were interested in a little bit of larger units, but we anticipate that we have some work to do to right size and make sure that we're meeting the needs of multiple stakeholders that might be interested, and therefore there may be a requirement for a number of smaller units as well to meet different
Sure.
different folks. Did you want to add to that? Or? Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, the current total maximum residential that we're applying for under this land use is 80 units, but as described, the flexibility of being able to build less than those number of units would be dependent upon tenant and market requirements. But 80 units is the total maximum on site that we're requiring.
Thanks for clarifying that. I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Donald. There are two other councillors on a question. There's Councillor Price and then Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about parking for a second. How many underground stalls are you proposing, and is that for the residential or for the shoppers?
Through the chair, I'm going to defer this question to my architect.
In response to the parking provided, we've got a combination of both retail, residential, and some off-site parking requirements that are encompassed in, I'm going to say, 3 different types of parking. The traditional surface parking, which would be a standard surface stall. There's heated and enclosed underground parking within the footprint under the buildings that's not visible. And then there's a structured parking that we've got that has a level that's below grade but still visible from the exterior. So in terms of the dedicated underground parking, which is primarily for the residential users, there would be a maximum of 123 stalls provided on the site.
Thank you. And I noticed there's like something called an upper deck parking that sort of, it looks like it backs on to some residential. So how would that impact the residents there, and what are you doing to minimize that impact?
Through the chair, the deck that you're referring to is on the rear of the property, as you said, buffered up against some of the residential property line at that point. The intent would be to provide a lowered level deck, so below grade, but again, still visible from grade. It's almost a half level out of below the grade, which would provide a above level deck that's open to the sky and visible. But that surface height of that upper level deck is approximately 1.3 meters, or just over 4 feet above the grade level. So in terms of impact on surrounding residential, it is only about 4 feet above the surrounding grade, which again, through adequate fencing, landscaping, would not be an impact beyond what a traditional surface parking lot would be in that location as well.
Thank you for that. With something like an upper deck parking and issues with different levels, are you concerned about any of the drainage off the property, or have you already dealt with those issues?
Through the chair, the overall grading and drainage patterns have not been designed to meet all the kind of technical requirements that will be there, but we certainly reviewed and analyzed the overall site to be able to ensure that what we're proposing can be adequately proven and built without any issues of impacting either the site that we're proposing or any of the surrounding community sites. Essentially, the existing grades on the perimeter within this design up against the existing properties that we would front on face zero change in terms of their grades from the current levels that they've got.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for appearing. My question concerns when, if approved, this construction would start, when you'd expect to complete, and what measures you'll be taking to ameliorate any disruption to the neighborhood while construction is going on.
Thank you. Through the chair. Our intent is that if this application is approved, that we would begin to market the condominiums in the spring, and or even immediately before that time, and depending on how sales go, which we're quite confident about, we think that we could possibly start phase 1 early summer. And again, this is a phased development, so we have an existing restaurateur who would be first, and that restaurateur his building would be built, and then his old building would be demolished. And then if we have appropriate sales percentages, then we could commence within 12 months on the condominium development, the first phase. Then we would move the existing retail tenants over into the first phase, and then be able to demolish the existing shopping center. So all of that, again, market dependent. In a perfect world, might be 3 years.
And it's phased, so I'm guessing the impact on the residents as a result would not come all at once, but would be phased in. Is that correct?
Exactly, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Other, Councillor Vendura.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. As you doing the consultation on the units, you looked at for barrier-free units, like persons with disability. Have you, while you're going through your plans, putting units together, larger, smaller? I mean, it's a very desirable place to live. I mean, I really like that. So, question is about the barrier-free suites, or if you were contemplating that.
I will defer to Vince Dodge for that comment.
Through the chair, the suite designs, again, have not been progressed to a finalized detail, but the requirement in terms of handicapped accessibility for the buildings remains for all public buildings, including a residential tower or residential low-rise development like this, that would be fully serviced by ramps, elevators, and the suite design themselves. Currently, the suite designs are for single-floor units, so that would be obviously advantageous to the handicapped or disability in terms of having all of them on one levels at this point. So there would certainly be adequate design to be able to accommodate handicapped or disabled individuals in any or all the suites that we would be designing.
So you're talking about inside the suite, like the washrooms and the kitchens and things like that? Or?
Correct, and at this point, obviously, there'd be additional facilities that could be added specifically for, depending upon the type of disability, and that could be done through the purchase, and there will be some customization of the units, not just for disabled individuals, but others as well. So.
Thank you very much, Joshua. It's good to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vendura. No other questions? You can return to the gallery. We'll not consider the report. We have a motion for CR 14-125, the Lakeshore redevelopment. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. From Planning Commission is an application for contract zoning, proposed commercial and mixed-use high-rise building, 1350, 1380, 23rd Avenue. If I could have a second, I'll speak to it.
Second, please. Councillor Hinks.
Your Worship, before I go too much farther, I want to make an adjustment. We actually, at Planning Commission, passed this, and I'll speak to that a little bit, but there was a wording that we did not like in here, and we wanted to give our staff an opportunity to correct that. And if this goes ahead, I will correct it at the bylaw stage as well. So I refer members of council to page 2. I don't know how you do these 3 little I's, but I'll call them 3 little I's. It's that line there that I want to correct. I will tell you what I'd like it to read. Design of a landscape plan which includes a public multi-use pathway for an area of approximately 7 acres along the west side of Hillsdale Street from 23rd Avenue to Lakeshore Drive. So if I could have a seconder on that.
Seconder for that, please. Councillor Hinks again.
So we just didn't like the wording, and this is what's referred to in terms of what the Wascana Center. So if I could have concurrence, I'll speak to the rest.
Are there any discussions on the amendment? It's simply more a clarification of Roman numeral 3. I'm going to call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thanks very much.
Councillor O'Donnell?
I would like you to all pay very close attention to this report. I think you've heard most from the questions and your reading, of course, of what is proposed here. There is our total redevelopment in this area that will bring density to the area. So there's an obvious one. It'll be a mixed use, which is now a word that you are getting used to hearing, because we see that many times in applications that were coming before, which was not the norm before. You will also note that the applicant talked a little bit about trying to conform to things like what we have in an official community plan and what is good urban practice. So what you have is you have people who can live in an area, but shop in an area, and potentially even to some degree, I suppose, work in that area. I think that what I would suggest is that the debate that we had at planning, and I think the debate that they had in terms of the public open house, was just about the elevation and how that fits in. you would have heard the proponent say that, look, we need this type of density, and which results in terms of the height, to make sure that this thing works. You'll also note that tonight there is no people here in opposition. So the other question I asked, and the gentleman answered it very nicely, was about finish. So when we finished this report and we endorsed it, some of the folks on Planning Commission came over to me and said, it's so nice to see a high-quality development come forward. So that's why I asked the question, and that's what's there. Personally, I like this a lot. Planning Commission was unanimous in its approval for this. I believe this is something that we will see more in the future, and in my view, and we should see more of this in the future. We would seek your concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I like this a lot, too. I'm familiar with this corner. I drive through it frequently. It's in need of redevelopment, and this is a particularly good redevelopment. I just want to highlight one feature because Councillor O'Donnell has made many important points. The feature I want to highlight is the architectural integrity of this development. I think this will look really good. I think it sets an example for a Regina that's growing, that we're not just throwing up any building here, but we're throwing up a building that has paid real attention to architectural detail. It will add to the corner, it will add to Wascana Center, and I think it's a very strong addition to the community, so I support it enthusiastically.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Hinks.
Thank you. I think this is a great project for Regina, and this fits what we've asked all the developers to do. It's both infill and high density, and it's exactly what we want. And I'd like to thank the Harvard people for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hinks. Other speakers? Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Your Worship. That I too stand to support that this particular piece of property and this particular project has a bit more of an emotional tie to me. That our family moved to Hillsdale in 1959, December 31st, and so we're one of the first homes in that area. And we just sold the home a couple of years ago after my mother passed away. But I spent many nights and weekends pumping gas at Hillsdale Shell. So I have always kept an eye on what I call my home, because I think that's probably where most of my memories were. And when I saw this proposal, I think to see the quality of the design and the unique aspect of the design, I thought, wow, I don't think you could have had a more perfect sort of, I think, design and proposal to come for that particular piece of land. And I normally don't stand up on new building proposals, but this one was very personal, so I just want to say thank you, and I'll be supporting this as well.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. Just a question that was discussed at planning was, when was the last time there was gas pumped at the Shell? I meant to ask the delegation, but maybe administration knows. What was the year? Do we remember? Anybody remember?
Ms. Warlock.
Through you, Your Worship, I don't know that answer. I'm not sure if Mr. Searle would have that answer.
Can't get any gas there, Councillor Flagel. So
No, people were asking that, so I just wanted to make sure I can get an answer to.
2005.
2005? Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Flagel. Other speakers? Before I turn it over to Councillor Down to close debate, I just had a quick comment to make. This is a wonderful project, and I want to just highlight the sensitivity of Harvard to speaking with Wascana Center Authority and having a very much a respect for the jewel of our city, Wascana Center Authority, but also integrating into the development. So it's a wonderful project, and I certainly will support it very much. Councillor Donald.
Thanks. I'll just pick up on that point, and I want you to know the proponent knows what I'm going to say to you. I think if you pass this, and as Planning Commission did, we were generous in terms of the whole notion of the density and the height. And I think that's good, but that's also important. And I want to make sure that we invite Harvard to be very generous in that development that will occur across the street and how we tie the park to this development and to this part of the community. Very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donald. You've closed debate, so if there's no further debate, I'll call a question on the report. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. I'm going to 14-126. Councillor Donald.
Again, from Planning Commission, this is an application for a contract zoning, a proposed low-rise apartment building, and the addresses are 1914, 1920, and 1924 Halifax Street.
The seconder for that, please.
Thank you.
Councillor Hinks.
I'm going to declare a conflict on this.
Declare a conflict, okay.
Thanks.
Conflict so noted. You may want to just explain why you're in a conflict, just so people would know that. Just a quick reason.
Sure, I've balanced my time here with working at the YMCA of Regina. We handle the federal government's homelessness money, and this is a project that's also applied for that grant. So
Excellent. Excellent. Well noted. Thank you. Councilor Donald.
Thanks very much. So what you note here is that it is a affordable rental units for moderate income tenants of 12 bachelor suites, 12 one-bedrooms, and 7 two-bedrooms, 11 which are barrier-free. So you'll also note in the report it talks about size, and that in fact there is some small size. When we were doing, again, back to the downtown plan, and when we've had other things discussed in terms of area around the general hospital, around the downtown, there is an explicit need for some smaller units. This fellow has come forward with what we think is an excellent plan, meeting a need in our community, and of course there's a number of units here. So there's a mixed use here from the point of view of size, bachelor, as well as up to the multi-bedroom. We think this is a great one, so we'd like you to support this.
Thank you, Councilor Donald. Other speakers to the report? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councilor Flegel, 2 bylaws.
Thank you. Just point of clarification, should I just do 84 by itself before Councilor Fraser comes back in, or?
Yeah,
Can he be
the second
involved?
bylaw is related to what we just did. You should do them separately, yes.
Yeah, we'll do 84 first,
Yes.
and then he can come
Yep.
back in for 82. Okay. Okay, moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Hawkins that bylaw 2014-83 be introduced and read a first time.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
If I could interrupt, this bylaw as it sits, as it's currently read, does not include the change that we made.
Oh, okay.
So if we could, again.
We would do it on the next phase of this.
That's
one,
what I
just
wanted to check.
introducing it, so they're probably at that second stage.
Okay.
Councilor Flegel?
Vote. Have to vote?
No. Oh, what's that? Yeah.
Yes.
No, do we? Okay.
No. We're doing the Halifax one. Yes, we should do it. He said 83.
Should be
We're doing
82, I'm
82.
sorry.
You're doing 82.
Yeah, let me restart.
I thought you said 82. Well, we'll begin again.
Yes.
Councilor Flegel.
Yes, it's
on
82,
this is
not
on
83.
82.
Okay. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Hawkins that bylaw number 2014-82 be introduced and read a first time.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. Council has now considered the report respecting the proposed low-rise apartment building to be located on the 1900 block Halifax Street, and Council will now consider an amendment to the Regina zoning bylaw to accommodate this proposal. And if there is anyone in the gallery who wishes to address Council on the amendment, I would ask them to identify themselves at this time. There is no one, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll vote on the first reading, then Councilor Donald can make an amendment on the second reading. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councilor Flegel.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Hinks that bylaw number 2014-82 be read a second time.
Councilor Donald.
Thanks very much. So just want to make note that when you vote on this, it is with the wording change, or if I could have the wording change, do I need to read it in? No. So everybody acknowledges that we made a wording change. And then if you vote in favor of this, it will go through the bylaw.
I'm going to use it as an amendment to that bylaw. You're
Just
moving an amendment?
Point of order, isn't that for the amendment for the Harvard project? Not for the Halifax Street one?
Yes.
So I think we're talking
Read that
about
one.
different bylaws.
We all got out of sync here, yes.
Okay.
The amendment is for the next, not 82.
All those in favor of second reading? Opposed? Carried. Councilor Flegel.
Very good. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Burnett, that Council hereby consent to bylaw number 2014-82 going to a third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Bryce, that the bylaw number 2014-82 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we can have,
Wait for Councilor Fraser.
Councilor Fraser back.
Third time's a charm, eh?
Councilor Flegel.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hawkins that 2014-83 be introduced and read a first time.
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. Council has considered the report respecting the proposed redevelopment of the Lakeshore Mall site located on 23rd Avenue and will now consider the amendment to the Regina zoning bylaw to accommodate this proposed mixed-use building. If there is anyone present in the gallery who wishes to address council on this amendment, I would ask you to identify yourselves at this time. There is no one, Your Worship.
Thank you for that. I'll call the question on first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hinks, that bylaw 2014-83 be read a second time.
Councillor O'Donnell, this time you got it right.
I think we got it now.
I don't think
We
I
all
have
got
to,
it wrong.
I don't have to
We all
speak,
got it
do I?
wrong.
Good, thanks.
So we all know, we know what the wording is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? That's carried.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Burnett, that council hereby consent to bylaws number 2014-83,
As
going
amended.
to a third reading at this meeting,
As amended.
as amended.
Right. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Bryce, that bylaw 2014-83 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to delegations, communications, bylaws, and related reports. D 14-91, David Foley. You could come forward and tell us who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and then there'll be questions afterwards. You want to press the button, just, there you go.
Better.
That's much better.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Dallas Wingerick. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate and Operations for Choice Properties REIT, which is the beneficial owner of 4450 Rochdale Boulevard here in Regina. We're here this evening as a delegation to speak to our development permit application. We have 2 projects that we're working on very, very seriously in Western Canada. The first Choice Properties REIT project in Western Canada will be 4450 Rochdale Boulevard. So we're very excited about this project, and with that, I think I would pass it over to David Foley of PC Urban.
Thank you. David Foley from PC Urban Properties. We've been engaged by Choice Properties REIT as the development manager for this application. First comment is thank you to staff for a very engaging consultation process from our pre-application onwards, as well as comments and dialogue with Planning Commission when we were here 2 weeks ago. We'll be very brief this evening. We just want to comment on 2 items that generated a lot of discussion with Planning Commission. The first one was access to the property. Our team has looked at this issue. We're very confident that the relocated access, as we've presented in final consultation with staff, and from comments from Planning Commission, addresses the concerns identified with respect to access and improving safety to the shopping center, and will function very, very well at final build-out. The second item that was brought up was parking and parking supply. PC Urban, we have 35-plus years of experience developing commercial properties, and we pride ourselves on creating properties that work for the tenants, work for the community, and work for the customer. Our approach to development is to analyze a site, balance out the requirements, and create a good balance of uses, parking density, and activity on site, including tenant mix. We are very comfortable, and our traffic impact report supports this. We're very comfortable that the property, as it's finally designed, is adequately parked for the uses and the tenant mix that we have on the site. And a lot of the technical details covered off in the supplemental report from staff, which we think captured the essence of what we were trying to achieve very well. And we're available to answer questions this evening.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor O'Donnell has a question.
Thanks very much. Good evening. Welcome. And so you did address the 2 things that we talked about at Planning Commission, but we may go along here a little bit more. So what's your intent on the site? What is it you're trying to bring to the site that's different than just having a grocery store?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of the reason that Choice Properties REIT was developed a year and a half ago by Loblaw Companies was that they have a large stock of shopping center sites in the country that are just shopping centers with large grass fields or large parking lots with nothing else on them. And I think one of the things that Loblaw Companies realized at the time, and now Choice Properties realizes, is that communities want not just a grocery store, they want complete, not unlike your discussion about mixed use earlier, they want complete services for their communities, places that they can shop, places that they can get all of their services, not just groceries, places that they can go out for a meal with their family, places that they can go and get a coffee. And the intention of this project from the very get-go when we started discussing it was to provide a more fulsome experience in the community and at the same time, obviously, to support the grocery store and take advantage of the grocery store. So a more holistic shopping option in the community.
Thanks very much. So we'll get to a variety of places and how much that impacts parking, but I don't want to forget to ask about, there are residents to the north of the property here. And so could you explain a little bit about the, I'll say it this way, the barrier you're trying to put up or the protection that you would like to put there?
Yes, through the chair. Along the residential development to the north, we are going to be putting at the top of the embankment that goes along the north property line, we'll be putting up a 6-foot fence that borders the housing development immediately to the north of us. As well, we are going to, as a fundamental aspect of all of our developments, and in this property in particular, make sure that we are retaining and protecting the mature landscaping that's already along the north property line. And that's a hallmark of the landscape design for the site as a whole.
Is there a embankment there already, or is there some height that you could describe for those that may have not shopped there?
Yes, again, through the chair. Some varying topography along the north boundary of the property, and it gets higher as you move east towards Pasqua Street. And you're in and around the 2.5 meter height difference already from if you were to be standing at the current parking lot along the north property line to the top of the embankment. So it's about 2.5 meters, or about 8 feet, and we're looking at approximately a 6-foot fence. So the difference will be, depending on the topography, in the 12 to 14-foot range.
Okay. Thanks for making that clear. Let's talk a little bit about Rochdale. You'll have some structures, business buildings right along Rochdale. So if I'm walking along Rochdale, is it inviting? How do I get to that, or how are you setting that up?
One of the aspects that we try, one of the aspects, again, through the chair, that we're trying to achieve with this development and many of the other ones that we're working on in other jurisdictions is to create a strong urban edge. So a blend of being able to engage the street, a building closer to the street, as well as complementary landscaping. So if we move across, as we move across the property, for instance, the one we have labeled as Building A, which is at the the Rochdale and Stockton entrance intersection, we have a coffee shop at the corner that provides opportunity for people to engage the street. We also suspect that would be the most successful of the two corners. There is residential, there are businesses, there are other retail uses near there. That would be the logical spot to access it. On the opposite end of that building on the east side, we've created an opportunity to have a restaurant at that location as well. So there is activity, it is animating that edge. And we've taken a similar approach with Building B, which is at the Pasqua and Rochdale intersection. Again, wrapping the end of the building with glazing so that it addresses the street and it engages the street, allows pedestrians to come in.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So one of the things that I heard at Planning Commission from one of my colleagues was he said, this could be a destination point. I'm going to pick up on that thought based on what could be here. So I'll describe the situation, I'll get you to react. I drive to this location and park my vehicle. Do you envision then that I would perhaps go to a drugstore, have a meal, get my groceries, and drive away? In other words, do multitasking, but only use one spot. Would that be fair?
Again, through the chair, very fair. one of the hallmarks of the site intensification is to create a place to go. When this is finally completed, it'll be a very, very different place. You will have the ability to cross-shop. You'll be able to have the ability to, one trip would equal 3 or 4 different activities, is how we see the property being used at the end of the day. So your description, Councillor, is quite apt, and that's how we expect it to be used.
Thanks very much. To the west of this property are many high-density housing units. Would it be your thought that any of those people would walk to this location for a variety of reasons?
Well, if it was a night like tonight, I suspect not. But I'm a Winnipeg boy myself, so I suspect in the summertime, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't walk here. Some of the tenants that we are proposing for the property would lend themselves to being able to stop in to get a meal. The expression I've heard used by our friends at Loblaws and other grocery operators that we deal with is the handbasket crowd, which is being able to walk to a grocery store, you get a handbasket full of groceries, and you stop for a coffee or you stop for a small meal before you head home, or pop in and do a quick errand, let's say at the drugstore.
Thanks very much. I'm going to leave the talking to you. That's good for me.
Councillor Donald. Councillor Flagel, then Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, and welcome back. And one thing I do is I appreciate the phone call that you and I had, you and your partner, about a week ago, just talking about it. And that's the one thing I wanted to bring up. And I know this has been a long time coming. Superstore's been there since '99 or 2000, and it's been vacant. What the biggest significant change you made from planning to today on Stockton is what? The access.
There were, again, through the chair, there were several items that we did from the dialogue we had with Planning Commission, and several items. We, at the access point itself, we've added a right-hand out lane to facilitate northbound movement, which improves the stacking of vehicles trying to leave the site. In the current situation right now, it's 2 lanes. It creates backups, and it also creates some issues with stacking heading southbound on Stockton. The location of the access point has moved 21 meters to the north, which aligns with the commercial entrance on the opposite side of Stockton Street. We also made some, really doesn't show up on the plan, but is quite significant based on recommendations from our traffic engineer, is the incoming lane has been widened, which facilitates quicker movements, but safer movements as well onto the property. And then finally, we have introduced onto the final submission that was included on the package, the provision for directional signage, the design of which we have not established yet, but we'll be providing something either pole mount or probably be pole mounted, because if it's a night like tonight, you're not going to be able to see the arrows or other directional signs.
Right. That was something we talked about, just to have an overhang.
Correct.
Like there is on Rochdale today. The other thing was, what's that going to do for the traffic on Stockton? I think you have a number of, like today, there's only 8 or 9 cars that can queue from Rochdale backwards, going north. With this new change, how many?
Again, through the chair, the existing vehicle stack heading on Stockton is approximately 5 or 6 vehicles.
Okay.
By making this change, by moving the access further north, there's actually 2 stacks now that are available to make the traffic movement safer. So we'll have 8 or 9 vehicles that can stack on Stockton, southbound, and we can get another 5 to 7, call it in the throat of the exit exit and access to the shopping center, and then there's the capacity to back up into the main drive aisle. So we've gone from, call it 6 to 8 stalls between the 2 to well over a dozen.
Okay. The other thing that was brought up, and I think you addressed it, but I'll just get you to mention, the driveway slope is pretty critical. It's pretty slope today. People are sliding down. What kind of a big change are you making? You're going to make it longer or less? dramatic, I guess?
Through the chair, yes. The current grade, it's a pretty quick turn onto Stockton and then turn into the shopping center. That grade is about 5% right now. Working with our civil engineer and working with, call it the throat of the access point, we're going to get that to about 2.8%. So it would be a significant reduction in the grade, and we're going to make up that grade difference on the property itself, and then tie into the grades on Stockton Street.
Thank you. Through you is one other thing that I had asked, and we took a quick look at it, was is there a way to put a right turn lane by itself further north yet? And your comment was?
It starts creating a whole variety of issues. One is the proximity to Child Avenue. By moving the entrance to where it is today, we are addressing a lot of safety issues and traffic engineering issues by putting another access. If it's along the front of the store, that's something that Loblaw Properties would not support. It's a safety issue with their shoppers. And if we start moving further north of where it is right now, or another traffic movement, we get too close to Child Avenue.
Right.
And that, again, not safe.
Now, the total square footage of the 5 buildings that you're proposing is how much?
Through the chair, approximately 48,000 square feet.
48,000. And as I look on here, if I could, 6,500 is not leased today. Suppose close.
Through the chair, that is correct. On Building B, which is the one that's at Pasqua and Rochdale, there's approximately 3,500 square feet that's vacant, but we are in negotiations with a financial institution. Unfortunately, I can't mention who it is tonight. And then in Building A is the remainder, is the balance of that space. And we're in discussions with about a half a dozen different interested parties for that space, for nothing concrete yet.
And just one more quick, I noticed that we didn't talk about it, but behind Superstore today, there was concern from the residents about speeding cars ripping through. And my understanding is you were going to provide rumble strips or traffic calming or something behind there. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. There's 2 provisions that we're making, or actually 2 provisions and then 1 benefit of the development overall. We're putting traffic humps at strategic locations out of the path of the delivery trucks that will be servicing the superstore, but in strategic locations, so that it becomes a bit of a deterrent to people passing through. We also suspect, we actually saw this at our first visit to the property a year ago, 3 or 4 teenagers actually doing donuts in the parking lot. I won't throw stones. I may have been guilty of that when I was 16 back in Winnipeg. But with the site intensification and the introduction of activity on the east side of the superstore, you now have eyes on the parking lot. You have movement through the parking lot, both pedestrian and vehicle, that will in effect act as a traffic calming influence to that area of the shopping center regardless.
Thank you. And it's not just teenagers.
I know.
I've seen.
I think there were some admissions at the Planning Commission about that.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. I noticed that the blue bins have been on this lot for a very long time, but I notice in your plan I don't see any recycle bins. Are you not going to have that anymore? Through you, Mr. Chair?
We haven't, Mr. Chairman, we haven't addressed that specifically. We did not make accommodation for them in this plan. It has become a little difficult to administer those bins, and there has been an issue with some untidiness at the site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Councilor Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. It's kind of a twist on Councillor O'Donnell's about being a destination point. That this week we have what we call Canadian Western Agribition in town, one of our major events, and we're doing a pilot on busing. And part of the concept is that people from outside the city will come park in some of the peripheral malls and then go to the event and come back. And in my mind, I see sort of some restaurants, and they might leave their car there for a lengthy time, but then after a football game, whatever, would come back and take advantage of the restaurants and leave and go away. From a corporate perspective, do you have policies that you would be supportive of looking at that kind of an arrangement with the city? Because, like I say, once the new stadium's built and we have Farm Progress and others, that the pilot so far today with Canadian Western Agribition has been over the top, and it's just wonderful to think of being able to shuttle and keep so many cars off the roads. So just curious, because I like the idea and concept of a destination, but like I say, there's quite a few people now coming in from outside the city.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we, site by site, assess that, and certainly Loblaw Companies, and now Choice Properties REIT, has a history of entering into those relationships with communities individually on a site-by-site basis. It would take a little bit of time, of course, to work out how many cars we would be talking about, but it's certainly something that we would be open to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Burnett. Councilor Fraser?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Sounds like an interesting project. I'm just curious, if somebody wanted to take the bus to Superstore, do you know how they would do that now, and if this will change, how this will change that for people? Thanks.
I hadn't thought of that.
Actually, yes, Mr. Chairman. I don't actually know how people take the bus to Superstore today, but certainly being accessible to public transit is key to any of the shopping centers that we develop, and we would hope that any of the stops that transit has near this location would not be impacted by that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Fraser. Any other questions of the delegation? Thank you for your patience answering our questions. You can return to the gallery. Actually, there are two reports on this one, a supplemental report. Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks. The number is 14 at 127. It's a supplemental report application for discretionary use. Proposed shopping center, 4450 Rochdale. If I can have a seconder, there's a receipt and file, but I will speak to it briefly.
Councilor Flagel seconds it. Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. All this is some information, and you heard some of the questions we had for the delegation. What I'd like to do is just use this as we talk about the overall report. So I have no further information, and we'll use it next time.
Anyone else want to speak to the supplemental report? It's receive and file. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The main report, 14-128. Councilor O'Donnell.
Thank you again. So this is an application for discretionary use, proposed shopping center, 4450 Rochdale Boulevard.
Seconder, please. Councilor Hinks, you're batting 1,000.
Thanks very much. So a number of years ago, and I struggled a few minutes ago to try and remember, I was probably 10 years old, but this was a concept along Rochdale Boulevard that was new, and was called the Main Street effect. What they wanted to do along Rochdale Boulevard was have all sorts of things like businesses and malls and high-density housing and so on go. And so it started in one end and was making its way. And it took a long time for it to go along. But so, you know, in my way of looking at it way back then was it's kind of like downtown Regina way back when. So the idea was the Main Street. If you ever drove to this location, you would see that there was an awful lot of property. What we identified at Planning Commission, because there's a number of people have actually gone to this location, was there's probably this whole section of the parking lot, probably close to 40% of it was never used, other than maybe some donuts and where I taught my son how to drive a car. So it was just an open area. So the idea that, in fact, it would have other businesses come to it seemed to make perfect sense as we started to listen. Now, I told you last time when we talked about what was going on in Hillsdale, I said, you got to pay attention. I want you to pay attention to this one, because there's another location of Superstore in the East End. And guess what? It has property around it, and it, too, sits on the same location, similar. So now I'm going to identify it slightly different. I want you to also think about hotels. Do you recall a little while ago that we identified and agreed to hotels to the north? So people will come in, I like the notion of Agribition and so on, stay there, and now they can shop here and think about what's around here from what's on the other side. They'd be competitors and so on, but what's also could be on this location. I like the notion of destination because I think that's what this could become. But it also, if you look at what's around here, there's tons and tons and tons of commercial. And yes, you can cross the street in many ways. And yes, you can shop in many directions, but you have a place to go. We really like this one. I want to pay a compliment to the proponent. It's very rare that we have people who pay such close attention when we have objections at Planning Commission. I'm being somewhat facetious, but point of this is, and I think Councillor Flake will talk about, but we have problems with stacking of cars on Stockton. It's a very small street, but very busy. They address that. We talked about the parking. That's why you have a supplemental report and what it means. And that's why I tried to describe to you that you can come and park your car and walk and walk and walk and walk and then drive away. We think there's more than adequate parking. In fact, we think it's generous parking. So they've taken some notions as to how to protect the existing residents there with a very tall barrier situation, and then you have access from the out of town to this park. We just think this is a great one, so we'd look for your concurrence.
Thank you, Councilor Donald. Councilor Flagel.
Thank you. Yes, I'm definitely in support of this, and I guess this all goes back to 2003, 2004. I tried to get Superstore to deal with this issue of Stockton, and now we've got a chance to do it. And I believe that I think this is as good a solution as we can come up with. The one thing I will have to ask administration on is right now there's a solid yellow line that actually prohibits people from making a left-hand turn out of Superstore onto Stockton. Whenever they're painted, it's always a solid line, which means you can't cross it. So will we be changing that? Does it matter? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out from our roadways people. Because they do the turn arrow, they do the straight through Rochdale, but it's always a solid line. And according to law, you're not supposed to cross that solid line to make a left-hand turn to get onto Stockton. So,
Ms. Caswell?
Your Worship, that's something we could definitely look at with our traffic branch, and when we were out there repainting, look at what's appropriate for the situation.
okay, good, thank you. Because, you get the people that are still saying that, it's illegal to cross there. So, great, I'm glad we're going to do that. We put the turn arrows above those the traffic lights on Rochdale because the painted lines were always gone. The developer is going to put those same types of signs at the exit of Stockton to make a left, to make the left, and then to make the right out only. So that's going to improve the people's visibility, especially on a night like tonight, and the painting is gone, and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, there was about 3 or 4 things that we talked about that really made it easy for us to approve this, and one was the speed bumps behind. The second was the fencing that's going to protect, and really, they didn't have to do this because it's not their responsibility. It's the developer of those condos that they should have been going after. There's pine trees that block the apartment style, so there won't be fencing behind there, but everybody to the east of those apartment building condos will have fencing of 6 feet from what the developer was saying, and that's going to be good news because now it'll section it off, and there'll still be an 8-foot riser plus a 6-foot fence. We've got 14 feet, quite a bit more privacy. The biggest access point for us was we're hoping to move that access from Stockton, or onto Stockton, as far north as possible. And I think the developer did a good job on that to make sure that there's enough safety there's enough people that can go through. Now the other thing, there is a list of businesses, and it is public here, so we've lost a higher end restaurant in our area behind the tap, so that's gone. But we now are going to add a Montana's, a Swiss Chalet, a Shoppers Drug Mart, a breakfast, lunch, and restaurant, upscale casual restaurant, banking facilities, other financial services, takeout, a few different ethnic type foods, and a coffee house, all on this location. We never had any there before. Competition's good. I appreciate what you're doing, and Councilor O'Donnell's right. Look out, because actually it's nice because we're putting something in the north end before the east end. I like that. But I'm definitely in favor. I think we've addressed the concerns of the residents in the area. The condo people as well are happy. I've had a few phone calls regarding the noise and the rumble strips, et cetera, et cetera. It's all going to be good news. It's going to take a little bit of time to get it all put together, so everybody bear with us because we'll get it done. And you're very welcome for me bringing this forward, Councillor Hanks. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Any other comments? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. Wondering if somebody can talk about transit to this area, if this is going to affect transit at all. Thanks.
Mr. Onright.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There is transit service. It goes north on Rochdale and then west on Stockton.
And that won't change?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Other comments on the report? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Move on to our next delegation, D 14-92, Trevor Linford. Mr. Linford, if you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions afterwards. Do you want to press that button?
Okay.
There you go. You got it.
Sorry.
Good.
Trevor Linford. I'm just representing myself, and I'd like to speak a little bit to the proposed changes to the noise abatement bylaw 6980. First of all, I'd like to commend the city for looking at modernizing the bylaw. However, I don't think the changes as proposed go far enough to give the individuals who actually enforce this bylaw the tools they need to do the job both effectively and financially efficiently. I've spoken to Councillor Hawkins a number of times on this issue, but I thought I'd bring it before council and provide council some of my background and experience with this bylaw, and then highlight some of the changes or what I think you should think about before going forward. I've been living in the Lakeview area for approximately 7 years, a little over 7 years. Almost immediately after moving in there, we started having issues, noise issues with a neighbor. For about the first 4 years, we didn't get the city or police involved. We just more or less sucked it up, tried to be the good neighbor, thinking this guy would grow up, move on. He hasn't. So for approximately the last 3 years, myself and numerous other neighbors have been calling the city police, the city line, with noise issues. I would say approximately from my house alone, we've called the line 30 times, not counting what other neighbors have called. Every time we call, the police do show up. Numerous times I could hear the police banging on this individual's door, trying to get him to turn down the music, with little to no success. I've talked to the city police after they've done this. They tell me the individual inside will peek through their curtains and tell the police to get lost or other colorful things to do. The police have then are about as frustrated as I am, because they say if no one will open the door, there's really nothing they can do, and they can't issue a ticket because there's no one to issue it to. Of all the times the police have attended this property, only one ticket has ever been issued. This was for a June 15, 2013 incident. I attended court along with 4 of my other neighbors. It took 13 months for this to go through the court system, and it was eventually thrown out by the Justice of the Peace because they said we can't prove who is responsible for the noise. So I think there's an obvious loophole in this bylaw that needs to be addressed. A couple weeks after this incident, there was another what I would consider a major incident where this individual had a truck on his front lawn which he was revving, a mud bogging truck that exhausts right off the manifold, that he's revving to the extent that 6-foot flames were shooting out of the manifold. Someone from 2 blocks away called in gunshots. The police showed up again within less than a minute, but did absolutely nothing to kind of deter or diffuse this situation. We attended court again, myself, my wife, 2 other neighbors, along with 13 statements to police. This incident happened in April. We attended court in October. It's been put off till January, so it's probably going to take another year or more for this to work its way again through the court system. I understand that noise violations are currently the lowest priority for police, and I understand that. I get that. I think it's a real waste of time and resources. Every time the police come, they ask how many people, and depending, they'll send either 1 or 2 cars. So you can see what the drain on resources this one individual is doing. It's currently costing the city thousands of dollars to try and issue a $100 ticket to this individual. And I think these are kind of the numbers the taxpayers need to see to give the people the tools to do the right job. In my opinion, these bylaws only work when 2 things happen. 1, the individual has to respect the bylaws, and the individual has to respect their neighbors. And in this case, obviously, neither one of these is happening. In terms of recommendations, I would see you added in your bylaw, add bylaw enforcement officers and police officers to Schedule A. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but my suggestion would be have an after-hours bylaw officer attend noise violations. They'd be a lot more flexible, be able to attend a lot quicker, in minutes rather than hours, because it wouldn't be the lowest priority on their list. All they need to do is film a short video, like I did at the incident of that truck backfiring on the lawn, and you'd have indisputable proof of a noise violation. This would be quicker, easier, cheaper, and more effective than the current way of enforcing the bylaw.
Mr. Linview, you have 30 seconds.
Okay. Secondly, tickets should be issued right to the property owner, and if not paid, go on to property taxes. This would ensure your fines are paid, and would force the landowner or property owner to deal with the tenant instead of the police. And this would close the loophole that I said about not opening the door. And lastly, I think there needs to be a definite escalation in the fines for chronic violations. I think your previous director of city planning summed it up best in an email to me when he said, it doesn't appear this individual takes our enforcement seriously. And to be honest with you, after 3 years and 30 calls to the police to my house, if nothing had happened, I wouldn't take the bylaw very seriously either. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There are questions from members of council. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Linford, for coming forward. You're right. You have talked to me, and your neighbors have talked to me, and I share your frustration as well. I'd like you to describe a little bit, if you can, the frustration, not just that you have, but the frustration of the whole neighborhood.
Well, like you said, we've been trying to deal with this for 3 years. We've met with we had a neighborhood meeting with Councillor Hawkins and the manager of city bylaws. I think 10 of us also attended a meeting with the mayor and gave a presentation. Like I said, I phoned the city police probably 30 times. I don't know how many times I've emailed the city contact through the website, probably so many times now that I won't accept my email address anymore. I think you can just tell by the tone of my voice the frustration I've experienced with my neighboring property, not just on noise violations, but that's all I'll speak to tonight.
Aside from this one property, can you describe the street a little bit? Describe the nature of the street. What's it like? And what
the street is a typical Lakeview, older type community street. Myself, my wife, I have 2 small children. There's other small children on the street. The remainder of the neighborhood is actually a lot of probably senior citizens. It's a nice, quiet street, 2 blocks from Argyle School. I don't want to move, but what are my choices?
I think you've been very clear. Thank you for coming forward. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Other questions of the delegation? You've been very clear. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Flegel.
Thank you. I rise for CR 14-129, a recommendation of the Community Protective Services Committee held on November 5th that the amendment of the Regina Noise Bylaw Abatement Bylaw number 6980 is outlined in this report be approved, and that the City Council be instructed to prepare the required amendments to the bylaw based on the changes outlined in this report.
Have a seconder for that, please?
Sure.
Councillor O'Donnell, thank you.
This is just, according to what we've been told, some cleanup, and there's another one on here that doesn't require council approval, and it's that the fine scale for animal noise be the same as the fine scale for ordinary noise, which is part of the bylaw. So just an add-on to that as well. So hopefully that'll put some teeth into this bylaw as well.
Thank you, Councillor Flegel. Other speakers to the report? Councillor Hawkins?
Your Worship, I have some questions for the administration on this. First of all, there are places where this is described as a voluntary fine. I'd like you to expand on what you mean by that, and let me be specific. I don't think it means voluntary in the sense that you get a choice to pay or not pay. I think it means voluntary in the sense as when you get, for example, a speeding ticket, you can choose to go to court and fight it, and if you lose, pay a higher fine, or you can choose to pay the fine expeditiously, and it'll be somewhat reduced. Is that what you mean by voluntary?
So who will take this one? Mr. Weary.
Your Worship, that is what's contemplated here, a voluntary payment for early payment. If individuals want to challenge the noise ticket, then they do have the opportunity and the right to have it heard in court.
So that the punishment, just to be clear on this, the punishment, if accepted, is not voluntary at all. You're going to pay a fine.
Mr. Weary?
That's correct.
Thank you. The second question is this. I gather there has been some difficulty in provincial court caused by the fact that case law suggests that you need 2 complaints as opposed to a single complaint to make the complaint stick. Is that correct? And if it's correct, do these amendments deal with that situation, and how do they deal with that situation?
Mr. Brewery?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer the question for Mr. Wary. Yes, that is what precisely what the changes are meant to address. The current bylaw says any noise that disturbs persons, and the court has interpreted persons very strictly to mean you have to have 2 people in every situation testify that they heard the same noise at the exact same time. And so we have changed it to a noise likely to disturb a reasonable person, which is an objective test, and it's meant to be less subjective, so not based on the people and how they feel, but based on the noise itself. And so that's something that we feel was the original intent of the bylaw, and that it's been interpreted so strictly by the court. We wanted to approach that with the 2 people issue you're speaking of.
Thank you. That's helpful. So just to confirm what you're saying, this will give the court some objective standards that it could apply in deciding whether there's been a violation. Is that correct?
Ms. Atchison?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you very much. And my third question really addresses the points that Mr. Linford has made. He has made a number of suggestions to tighten our noise bylaw up, and he has suggested, and I agree with him, that we do need to do something here to deal with this situation. What is the reaction of the administration to the kind of suggestions that he has put forward here tonight?
Ms. Atchison?
Through you, Mr. Chair. One player in this that's missing is the police service isn't here, and they are the ones that enforce this for us. So I think a conversation can be had with them about what they need. We did speak to them in particular about these changes, and these issues had not come up. So a conversation can be had with them as to whether they think a bylaw change is necessary. I think that the issues that were brought up, though, may not be bylaw issues, but maybe operational issues.
Your Worship, just to add to what Ms. Atchison has said, there is an issue around after-hours enforcement for bylaw officers. We acknowledge that. The second issue and recommendation from the delegation related to adding tickets to the tax bill of the property owner. In our view, we currently don't have the legal authority to do that in the Cities Act, so that would, in our view, require legislative amendment. And then the third one, in terms of escalating fines, I think there's flexibility currently in the noise bylaw for escalating fines, but to be honest, it's very rare that we see repeat offenders in bylaw court for noise violations. I understand the frustration of this particular circumstance that's described in this neighborhood, but our experience has been we don't get too many repeat offenders in bylaw court, and if we were to have a repeat offender, we would of course be making reference to the previous conviction and be recommending to the bylaw court a higher fine. So that would be the position, and then it would be the court's decision as to whether to impose that higher fine or not.
Mr. Wary, is it the case that we don't see many repeat offenders because we don't get many convictions for noise bylaw offenses?
Mr. Wary?
There aren't many convictions. There aren't that many complaints that are brought forward. Our statistics show that in 2013, I believe the count was 40, and the conviction rate for noise is low, and one of the reasons is that strict interpretation of the evidentiary requirements that need to be proved to prove the offense. So we think the amendments that are proposed here should clarify what the legal standard is to prove the offense, and so it should be helpful. But there are a number of reasons why the conviction rate is not as high as you might see with other types of charges in bylaw court.
Can you tell me what those are?
I'll let Ms. Atchison respond to that question, Your Worship.
Ms. Atchison?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do have some statistics there from 2013. We haven't done 2014 because we haven't got to the end of the year, but I have that 28 tickets were issued by the police. So I don't know how many complaints they get, but we only got 28 charges in the court in 2013, and we obtained 7 convictions.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is this the point at which I can make some submissions?
A submission?
I can comment on the proposal?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to make a few observations. The first is, I think that Mr. Linford and his neighbors are entirely justified in their frustration. The second is, other cities manage to have their bylaws enforced more effectively. I'm not an expert in what they're doing, but whatever they're doing, we should be doing it too. We simply can't have a situation in which neighborhoods are disrupted by an unruly neighbor time after time again, and the process is frustrated either before it gets to court or after it gets to court. I think that these bylaw improvements, suggestions are an improvement in that sense, but it may not be enough. We may have to keep at this until we get it right to make sure that our neighborhoods are both safe and comfortable for people to live in. My third suggestion is this. If we're having trouble getting convictions in provincial court where the intent of our bylaws are clear, that's why we have an appeal process. And I'd urge that we press forward with convictions, and if we can't get convictions, that we appeal those convictions, and if an appellate court tells us there's something wrong with our bylaws, I think we've got to go back and fix them. My point is simply this: we can't, as a community, have a set of bylaws which are willfully disregarded, as is in the case here, or in which there is so much difficulty in enforcing them that we're frustrated at every point. So, Your Worship, Councillors, I am prepared to support this. I think this is a move in the right direction, but I think we need to beef up our enforcement procedures. I think we need to beef up our pressing these issues in court, and I think we have to send a very clear message to citizens that willfully flout our bylaws, that we're not prepared to stand for that anymore. I think we need to support neighborhoods in making sure that our bylaws are enforced and the neighborhoods are protected and livable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Fraser?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks also to Mr. Linford for your presentation. When I first heard that this was coming to council, I didn't actually think it would be a big issue. You know, the spirit and intent of the bylaw doesn't really change through this. It's just the enforcement mechanism. But I'm not sure about everyone else in council. I've received a lot of feedback about this, actually. And certainly the issue is that, you know, the enforcement of this bylaw, oftentimes it's about noise. But I think we can all attest that sometimes neighbors just don't get along. Most people in Regina, very agreeable. Let's agree with that. But there's a certain percentage of people that neighbors sometimes butt heads, and these bylaws can be used to sort of, you know, it's a product of people actually, the root problem is neighbors not getting along, not necessarily the noise itself. So I think, I agree that what we have right now isn't working. Thanks, Councillor Hawkins, well articulated about, you know, if we have bylaws, they have to be enforceable. I guess what's on my mind is that if we are going to now have a bylaw that's much more enforceable, how does it change that power dynamic between neighbors who sometimes butt heads? So obviously what we have right now, really when we only have this small amount of conviction, surely that power balance is in favor of the noisy neighbor. But if we change this, we have to appreciate that, you know, we don't really know how it's going to play out as far as that power balance maybe going to, you know, in the favor of the neighbor who's always phoning in. So I guess one other point I'd like to make, you know, someone that contacted me from the Heritage neighborhood, you know, her concern with this was that she has a dog that is actually kind of her security system. You know, she's been broken into a lot of times, and she has a loud dog that's part of, you know, making sure no one breaks into her place. So there's a few of those nuances that I think we don't really know how this is going to play out. So I'd like to propose an amendment, and I'll look for direction from admin on this one, that if this is to pass tonight, that it comes back to council. Like, you know, we try it out there for some length of time. I'll look to you for direction on what would be an appropriate length of time, if it's 1 year, if it's 6 months or whatever, for us to try these amendments and then have a report back to see how it's working. So if I could first get a recommendation from admin about what might be an appropriate time, and then I'll put that amendment to a vote. Okay.
Ms. Atchison? Mr. Weary.
Worship, if I could just get Councillor Fraser to clarify what the specific direction to administration is, please.
Okay, sure, sorry for that. I would like to make an amendment to the motion on the floor that, if it passes tonight, that we'll get a report back, I guess, to see how it's working at some point in the future. I'd like direction on what's an appropriate amount of time. Is 6 months enough time to see how this is playing out? Is 1 year enough time?
Ms. Axelson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, once these changes come into force, we'll have to wait until charges are laid and go through the court system to give you enough statistics. The busiest time for noise charges is in the summer months.
Okay.
And so for those charges to come to court, it's probably going to be a year from now before we're able to know how those are playing out. December is always a busy time, so maybe early in 2016 we'd have statistics on the enforcement of the new.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to propose that amendment to this motion that we receive a report back from administration on how this new enforcement mechanism is working in early January 16. And I'll look for a seconder on that.
Seconder for that? No, okay, we need a seconder, or initially just seek clarification of the motion.
Clarify.
Councilor
Are you
Bryce?
saying that it come back here or come back to Community and Protective Services?
That's a good question. I guess back to council proper.
Okay. A seconder for the motion. Okay. Councilor Flagel. Motion's on the floor. You want to continue to speak to it, or?
No.
Okay. Councilor Bryce, to the amendment.
Thank you. I just think it would be appropriate for it to come back to Community and Protective Services because this is where it's originated from. So I would think that that would be a more appropriate, I would support that, whereas bringing a report back to council to see how a bylaw is doing after 2 years, I wouldn't support that.
It will come back here anyway if the committee wants it to.
I consider that a friendly amendment to my.
So it's back to council. Sorry, back to the committee, then to council. Any other discussion on the amendment? I'll call the question. Okay. What time in 16 was that? The spring?
January.
Okay. January 2016. On the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Other speakers? Councilor Bryce?
Thank you. I do want to see something with a little bit more teeth in it. As was said, this is life-changing for people. It affects how they sleep at night. It affects how they enjoy their own home. The delegation who was here, he said, we're even thinking about moving. So they're uprooting their family out of the community that they're in to appease a neighbor who's noisy and loud all the time. So this is life-changing for people, and I just want to make sure that we have enough teeth so that and something objective. So I know that it was mentioned by our administration that now we do have something objective. It's too bad we didn't have something that was more measurable, so that if you were over a certain decibel, they could come out and actually measure it and say, you're over the amount, here's your ticket. So I just hope this has enough teeth to stick so that people actually see our bylaw and actually comply with it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Other speakers? Councilor Dowell?
Thanks. I'll just add a comment this way. I think that the delegation that came forward inferred that the person beside him who was making the noise was not the owner of the property. May I suggest that you speak to the owner of the property and say what it is appropriate that you would like to say? To the point about neighbor versus neighbor, this is our life. Having said that, I don't like the story that this fellow has to live through. And so to all the discussion, this is great, but I think he has at least one other avenue open to him. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other speakers? I have a question to the administration. Will these changes, as proposed, have enough teeth to address the issues that the delegation spoke about? So we don't have a question of non-compliance or inability to have a prosecution. Do we have enough teeth in this proposed bylaw? Mr. Weary?
Your Worship, I suppose that to answer your question, I don't want to overstate what's in the bylaw. We've got voluntary payments, which is more of an administrative efficiency piece. The clarification of the definition is to clarify an interpretation of what the offense is. So I wouldn't characterize that as giving the bylaw more teeth, but really clarifying the meaning. And the enforcement powers that bylaw enforcement and the city police have are not changed based on what's in this bylaw. So to answer the question, there's nothing that addresses that concern. It's simply changes to improve the overall administration. So to answer your question, Your Worship, there's nothing that changes in terms of the enforcement powers.
Okay. Other questions or comments on this? Councillor Hawkins, you are, sorry, you can close the debate, Councillor Flager. You've already spoken once, sorry, but you wish to close the debate? Okay, I'll call the question on the report. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll move on to Regina Humane Society. Lisa Cook. If you could identify yourself and who's with you. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions afterwards.
Good evening. Whoops, sorry. Good evening, Your Worship, members of Council, administration. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this report. I am Lisa Cook, the Executive Director of the Regina Humane Society, and joining me today is Steve Battistolo, Regina Humane Society Director of Operations. The Regina Humane Society operates as an open admission animal shelter, providing a licensed veterinary hospital specializing in shelter medicine, pet adoption services, Animal Protection Act and criminal code enforcement, as well as community outreach programs supporting humane education, service learning, violence prevention, bite safety, and accessible pet care. These services are funded solely through voluntary donations by Regina Humane Society supporters and self-generated income. The Humane Society also provides essential municipal animal services to the city under a fee-for-service contract on a cost recovery basis. The Society provides municipal animal bylaw enforcement and impoundment services on the city's behalf. No profit is generated by the Society to deliver this contract. In delivery of bylaw enforcement, the Humane Society addresses numerous public and animal health and safety issues, including stray, abandoned, injured, diseased, or dead animals, bites and attacks, violation issuance, fine collection, and Regina Police and Fire Service requests for assistance. Under the Regina Animal Bylaw, a municipal impound facility is required to hold unidentified animals for 3 days and identified animals for 10 days. In 2013, the Humane Society accepted 4,337 animals. 85% were municipal impound animals. The Society provides assessment, treatment, housing, care, and disposition services in compliance with industry standards in delivery of municipal impound services. A multitude of expenses, including emergency medical care, population health maintenance, euthanasia, disposal, and zoonotic disease surveillance, are incurred in the delivery of municipal animal services to ensure humane animal care and safeguard public health. The Society provides the city with a suitable level of municipal animal service delivery at a reasonable cost with added benefits including safe and humane animal handling expertise, donated supplies and services, volunteer resources, and programs supporting responsible pet care. Our collaboration in the delivery of innovative, cost-effective, and life-saving animal welfare programs has received national recognition and resulted in a low community euthanasia rate. The existing partnership between the Humane Society and the city offers many benefits to our community. It maintains one point of service, eliminates service duplication, shares resources, reduces costs, supports quality and specialized service, and provides value-added benefits. However, the Humane Society cannot continue to operate these programs and services in its existing facility. Built over 30 years ago with volunteer labor and donated materials, the facility struggles to meet occupational and public health, safety, accessibility, and fire standards, or achieve the biosecurity necessary to prevent the spread of both zoonotic and canine and feline disease. The Humane Society must rebuild right away, but will build the right way. An acclaimed firm in animal care facility design was retained to develop project plans, conceptual designs, and budget requirements. While a new facility is when a new building is required, what it will enable in the community is significant. As other Canadian cities with similar facilities are proving, it will be a win-win for animals and the people of Regina. The proposed centre will be an efficient and cost-effective model of humane care and community involvement. It will have the health standards of a hospital, the educational aspects of a school, and the family appeal of a community destination, welcoming visitors to participate in comprehensive programs. The venue will also serve recreational groups through after-hours facility use. The center will replace traditional cages with healthier habitats designed to be odor-free and provide acoustic control to create an inviting environment for people to adopt and enjoy the company of animals. It will be the hub of an engagement strategy which works with groups in the community to build on strengths and opportunities while addressing areas in need of support or improvement in our city. We have a practical vision for our city. We are inviting the city to make a 20-year commitment to our mutually beneficial partnership in a Regina Animal Community Center which increases capacity to meet the needs of our growing community, aligns with best practice standards and community values, fulfills municipal impound and enforcement roles on behalf of the city, uses our expertise to deliver cost-effective and efficient services.
Ms. Cook, you have 30 seconds.
This facility must be replaced. We invite the City of Regina to confirm a long-term commitment to our partnership so Regina can become a model city with the first fully integrated animal community center of its kind in Canada, serving the city's needs, serving the Regina Humane Society's needs, and the needs of people and animals in our community for decades to come.
Thank you very much. Very
Answer
informative.
questions.
We have questions from members of council. Councilor Bryce?
Thank you. Can you tell me what your goal about euthanasia is?
Certainly, in 2008, the Regina Humane Society actually received a record number of incoming animals. And at that time, the euthanasia rate was extremely high. And at that time, we implemented a very aggressive strategic plan to be able to reduce the number of unwanted animals in our community. With much success, to date, we are approaching a 50% reduction in euthanasia since 2008. So we've seen reduced incoming thanks to our partnership program with the City of Regina in delivering subsidized spay and neuter services to reduce those numbers, as well as record-breaking adoption rates, which we have been able to achieve working in partnership with corporate organizations in the city and other private individuals.
So what's your final goal for euthanasia then?
That no healthy animal in our community is euthanized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Other questions of the delegation? I think you got a pretty good tonight. Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery, and we'll move on to report 14
Thank you. I rise in support of CR 14-130 and its recommendations of Executive Committee that the City maintain current animal control service levels and continue to pursue the renewal of the Regina Humane Society's agreement as the most cost-effective options to achieve this objective. Number two, that subject to budgetary approval by Council, the Deputy City Manager and CEO be authorized to resolve final terms and conditions of a definitive agreement with the RHS based upon the key commercial terms outlined in Appendix D. And third, that the $761,000 in increased operating funds required at 2015 to reflect the increased costs RHS has would occur in its delivery of city animal control services in a new facility be subject to approval by Council as part of its consideration of the 2015 general operating budget. And that the city clerk be authorized to execute any definitive legal agreements after review by city solicitor.
Thank you, Councilor Seconder. Councilor Bryce, that's good. Thank you. Other comments on this? Councilor Bryce?
Thanks. Anybody who's been out to the building that they have right now knows what a state of disrepair it is in. So I'm in full agreement that we have a new facility in the city limits of Regina. Would be fantastic. And we continue to provide good care to our animals in our community.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Councilor O'Donnell?
Thanks. I want to just mention something to the delegation. We didn't ask any questions of you, basically. We've heard you. We heard you repeatedly. And every time you come back, you've made some adjustments. And so I don't want to be disrespectful, but good gosh, you've done your homework. I want to be real clear about how I feel about this. One, I have no notion that the city will get into this business. We don't need another business line. We are well served by these people. They need a new home, clear. Need it in the city, terrific. Need it in the city so that the kids can come and volunteer. People can get there by public transit and make it a place, and it should be a community center. I think what people didn't hear very clearly was no cages, open areas. That whole educational component just sits really well. I think this is the only way to go. And now while what we have before us is still subject to budgetary approval, I will be supporting this at budget time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor O'Donnell. Councilor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the submission by the delegation as well. I just want to make one further point. I think there's a very solid business case for what is being proposed. All three main stakeholder groups will be contributing to this building. The city will contribute to it through the fees which it pays going forward. Other users will contribute to it through the fees which they pay going forward. And finally, the Humane Society will be contributing to the building through its fundraising efforts and the support of the volunteers and donors which so generously help it out. So that this is a solid case in which to go forward, in which we get a new building that's much needed, and I strongly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawkins. Councilor Murray.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and I too echo the same sentiments. I mean, every time I've been out and done a tour of the building, I'm always floored that these people have done so much with so little, that donated materials and volunteer time. They've done an absolute tremendous amount of work out of a facility that, frankly, is used up. I wouldn't say that it's in significant disrepair. It's simply used up. I mean, you started with very little. You've done a tremendous amount. There's not much left of that building, and it really can't survive any longer, and it really can't give us the services that are needed. So 100% in support, and I agree 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Other speakers? Councilor Flagel? Or you want to close? Okay. You can close. Councilor Flagel.
Just quickly, to the administration, and thanks for bringing all this forward. There's talk of having it in the city, which is, do we have space, or is there a facility that we could retrofit, or do we need to start from scratch, or is there any place that we might be able to, even temporarily, I guess, until they build? Because I know it's in disrepair.
Mr. Schoberg?
Your Worship, we continue to work with the Humane Society in terms of locating options. There are various land options that we're working with them on. So the preferred solution right now is to support the new build, and that's where we're actively identifying solutions, over the next period of time.
Thank you for that. On the funding side, I know at community services we were talking about the involvement of the provincial government, but because it is a bit of a regional, but it's a small part. Are we going to go forward, talk to the government, or are we going to leave that in the hands of the Humane Society, or have we already contacted them?
Mr. Schoberg?
Your Worship, the discussion around that was something that the Humane Society is committed to do in terms of the services they're providing for the provincial government. Of course, our arrangement with the Humane Society for the city portion of the services they deliver are fully covered. The city is covering the costs for those, and so the discussion is around approaching the provincial government, which the Humane Society had noted they would be looking to do to see if the province will fund the portion of services that they provide on behalf.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you, Councilor Flagel. You closed debate, so I'll ask a question on the report. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we move on to our next delegation, Mr. Jim Elliott.
I'll move his communication.
The seconder for that?
Second that, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councilor Flagel on report 131 on joint school site acquisitions.
Perfect, thank you. It's CR 14-131, and it's a joint use school site acquisition that City Council delegated authority to City Manager and Chief Operating Officer to, and I'm going to just go into my first amendment here, that it negotiate and approve city entering into any agreement as is in discretion are deemed necessary with the government of Saskatchewan and or development corporations as may be required to facilitate the acquisition and licensing of bare land real estate sites for 3 planned new joint use schools, provided that in entering into such agreements that the city shall not agree to assume any responsibility or liabilities to the province, any developer or third-party contractors in the event that land access or servicing of the same is delayed or ultimately cannot be delivered.
That's your amendment that was sent to everybody earlier on. Need a seconder for that, please? Councilor O'Donnell? Continue on.
Continue. then negotiate and approve the city entering into any agreements as in his discretion are deemed necessary, and this is by city manager and CAO, with the Government of Saskatchewan and Development Corporation as being required. Allocate $6,045,000 funding to be provided by the Government of Saskatchewan to facilitate the development of a school site in Regina's North End Lake Ridge, or it's called Skywalk, I think is the appropriate, at the corner of Diefenbaker and Pasco Street. That the following exemptions of the interim phasing and finance policy be approved. Contrary to an interim phasing and financing policy, Appendix A, Part 3, the City of Regina may provide funding for a portion of the infrastructure internal to the development of north of Lake Ridge. Contrary to the interim phasing and finance policy, Appendix A, Part 3, north of Lake Ridge, the City of Regina may provide funding for a portion water, wastewater, and stormwater projects, including a portion of the reconstruction of McCarthy Boulevard if directional boring is not feasible. So we're going to cover some infrastructure costs.
Okay, that's good. Speakers to the report. Councilor Fraser? We had a seconder?
Are we voting on the amendment
Well, I'm
separately?
just
I'm
wondering,
just curious.
he read that in as the actual report itself, so I'll take that as, so we had a seconder already for your main motion.
Yeah.
So, Councilor Fraser?
Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So to Executive Council, we heard that, the hope was this won't set a precedent for schools being built in Regina. I'd like to read a quote from a Leader Post article dated November 18th, entitled appropriately, "City hopes subsidization of P3 school infrastructure won't set precedent." And this is a direct quote from the Minister of Education, Doug Morgan. He says, "Regina ratepayers should pay something additional out of either a levy or a price variation because the new school amenities will be an exclusive benefit to the Regina residents. The rest of the province doesn't get those benefits." So I would just like to say that I absolutely think this will set a precedent. If someone has a more direct line with the province, but please share it with the rest of us because this is the Minister of Education ultimately responsible for this decision, saying it in the Leader Post. Part two, we have a lot on our plate right now. We have a new stadium to pay for, a wastewater treatment plant to pay for. We have a pension plan that has actually been a debt on the books for a long time. This council has rightly stepped up to make that an actual something we're going to tackle. But three big things. Those are actually just three things that we actually have a plan in place for. On top of that, we have a $2 billion infrastructure debt that we need to find money to pay for. We have recreational facilities. Next month, we're going to be talking about schools. Folks, we have lots to deal with. We need money for our own projects. Tradition has been that funding school sites is not a role that we need to play. So if that is going to change, we need to be clear about that maybe the province needs to roll back some of their taxes for us to increase our taxes because we don't have a lot of extra money laying around, certainly. Third point to make here is that this is a question about P3s, actually. We had our own difficult conversation about P3s here about 2 years ago. Keep in mind, it was a unanimous vote. We all supported a good P3 project that is going forward and is going to be a success. There's definitely a camp of people that think all P3 projects are bad. There's definitely a camp of people that think all P3 projects are good. I think most people want to, base them on their own merit. And I would say that if the provincial government's P3 plan for schools only works by offloading costs at other levels of government, by building at least one school in the neighborhood that doesn't exist yet, maybe we need to ask if this really is a good plan for the province. That's not clear to me. And finally, I think that one of the sentiments we heard at the last Exec Council meeting is that our hands are tied. I would offer that our hands actually absolutely aren't tied. We can just vote no to this. That's an option we have as a free thinking council here. The school, this is a P3 project for this school. If it doesn't go ahead in this round, it will be built at some point once this neighborhood is built out. And I think ultimately, on the balance of what this means, having a school right now that really shifts a lot of power and sets responsibility and sets a precedent for future schools versus maybe having to wait. Personally, I'm not going to vote in favor of this, and I would encourage other people to consider doing the same. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Fraser. Councilor Hawkins?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm simply not prepared to play politics with the education of our children. In a perfect world, we would not have to deal with this motion. But the world's a complex place. We need a school in that area of the city. This is a way we can get a school. Is this a precedent? It's only a precedent if we stop debating it and never discuss this kind of funding again. but I believe that there will be a process following this discussion in which these matters are raised. In other words, I believe that this is not a precedent unless we let it be a precedent, and I don't see that it necessarily will be a precedent or that we'll let it be a precedent. But the important point here is that we need this school. This is a way of getting the school. I'm not prepared to see the school delayed. I'm going to support this motion and get on with educating our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Flake, can you take the chair, please?
Mayor Fougere?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the report, but I understand the frustrations, and that was expressed at Executive Committee and in here tonight. But I would ask members of Council to look at the big picture here. We're looking at 3 schools to be built very quickly to meet the demands of our growing city. That is the most important element to think about. How we got here is a question of debate. And I must say I'm not comfortable with that. But I don't want to deny a school being built where there's pressing need for facilities capacity right now. So I'm going to support this. It is not a precedent. I don't accept it as a precedent. And just because the other party may think they can do this again, there's another discussion to be had later on. I mentioned to the minister, I didn't accept this as a precedent. And the reason we're here tonight talking about this is because the development in Northwest is an immature development compared to the other development sites in the city. So this is a one-off. This is one example. I don't see this as a trend at all. I do want to say, though, that the minister's comments in the paper, referenced by Councillor Fraser, are telling. Because if it is an issue for the province in the future, when we talk about local benefits, that's true. There'll be a daycare. That's true. Well, the mechanism to fund that is not property tax. It is school tax. It's education tax. That's where they go. Now, they're reluctant to raise taxes, and I'm reluctant to accept a download of responsibility to our city for education. But on the bigger picture, I would urge members of council to support this report because we're looking at 3 schools that are absolutely critical to the continued growth of our community. That's the big picture. So I'd ask you to please support the report before us. We'll have other times later on to discuss if this has an impact on other facilities in the future. And we'll be talking through SUMA, through City Mayor's Caucus. Those discussions have happened already about the need to be very firm with the province about downloading responsibilities that is not our responsibility. We can least afford it. 8 cents of every dollar collected in taxes goes to cities, not to build schools. Thank you. Other speakers to the report? Councillor Flegel?
Yeah. Thank you. No, I'm definitely in favor of this, and I don't appreciate the way it's being handled, but the minister also mentioned that it'll be put back into the queue, which could be 3 to 5 years away, and by the time you build it, it's probably 7 to 8 years. I'm not ready to wait 7 to 8 years for a new school when they're busting at the seams today, and we have nothing but growth coming. We have the Rosewood Center coming on, the group of people, Maple Ridge is building, more at Skyview, all the residential around it, Hawkstone, everywhere. It's definitely needed. It's a joint school. Both systems are going to be involved in it. Is there a recovery time on terms of funding that we can get back through the development after 10 years, 20 years? Do we have a rough idea where we can look at this?
Ms. Orlack?
Through you, Your Worship, we haven't negotiated that yet, but our intent is to recover the $3 million as quickly as possible.
Okay, good. That's good to hear because I don't mind fronting a bit of money. I mean, we do it all the time in the city with different things. And if we can get some payback to this, but in the meantime, in 3 years roughly, have a brand-new school, I'm assuming, would it take about 3 years from today to build? Or are we looking at longer time or shorter? Or?
Through your worship, our understanding is that the government wants these schools open for the fall of 2017.
So 2017, that's the same time as Connaught, right? Or are they 16? It'd be about the same time, I think. That's good to hear, because if we look at all the different growth in the housing and the condos and everything that's coming to the north end, plus the way the busing systems are going today, I mean, St. Angela's packed, McNeil's packed, Jansen's packed. The high schools are starting to bust, and I heard they're going to start, segregate, putting back their zoning as opposed to opening it up. You never know. It may end up with another high school at some point. But right now, we need to address the situation today for the next 5 to 10 years. This is going to do it. I think it's a worthwhile investment of $3 million. If it takes us 10, 15 years to get it back, we'll get it back. But we'll also have growth. And Councillor Hawkins, you're right. This is a big part of my area. And Councillor Hinks and Councillor Bryce and Councillor O'Donnell, we're all sort of feeding to this area. And I think it's very important to the neighborhood, so I'll be definitely supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. I did not, you closed the debate, I did not see Councillor Bryce's hand up. Councillor Bryce?
Thank you. I have concerns with the minister's comments as well. Very, very much concerned about that. I want to know what the plan is for this money to be paid back to the city, because my understanding is this isn't money that's given. It's money that we're actually going to get back. So what type of plan do we have in place for that to happen? I know it's being negotiated, but I just want to make it clear to people that we will be getting this money back.
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, your worship, the way it would work is we're going to work with the developer with respect to providing just over $3 million to facilitate the servicing of that area. So within the development agreement, it's an agreement that will state that as development takes place in Skywood, the developer will be required to pay us back those monies. So we will have all of the timelines and how the operations of the payback will work with interest and all of those things that need to be within the agreement. So as we're working forward with this, we'll have those agreements in the new year.
Thank you. So to me, this is more of a loan than it is a gift. So I don't appreciate the provincial government downloading onto us either. So I would not be in favor of this if we did not have a plan to get the money back. So I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Any other speakers? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Move to CR 14-132, changes to the cemetery's bylaw. Councillor Flagel.
Thank you. Yes, CR 14-132 is the cemetery bylaw. There's just been a few little changes here, and that the amendment to the cemetery bylaw as described in Appendix A of this report be approved, and that the amended schedules A, B, C, and D of the bylaws 2008 to 27 as contained in Appendix B of this report be approved as well, and that, of course, the solicitor is instructed to prepare the required amendments to the bylaw based on the changes outlined in this report. Community Protective has gone with concurrence on this.
A seconder for the report, please. Councillor Fundura. Any discussion, comment on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Move on to the next report. This is the pension long-term disability bylaw amendments to include EPCOR. Councillor Flagel.
Thank you. In CR 14-133, and the proposed revised recommendations are as follows: that the City Council approve amending a bylaw of the City of Regina's concerning superannuation and benefits bylaw number 3125, also as the called the pension plan, to add EPCOR Water Prairies Inc. to the definition of city, so as to have EPCOR become participating employer in the pension plan, and number 2, that the city solicitor be authorized to bring forward an amendment to a bylaw of the City of Regina concerning superannuation and benefit bylaw number 3127 to add the EPCOR Water Prairie Inc. to the definition of city. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. The seconder for that, please. Thank you. Mr. Schoberg, there's been some alterations on the report. You may want to speak to that.
Your Worship, happy to provide a bit of context for the changes in recommendations. The original recommendations included participation in both the pension plan as well as the long-term disability plan. You'll note from the amendment the long-term disability plan has been excluded. That's purposeful in the sense that we were notified earlier today that EPCOR and CUPE have negotiated an arrangement with a revised long-term disability plan that has been approved by both EPCOR, CUPE, and members involved. We have confirmed that the revisions meet Council's expectations of providing a benefit equal to or better than the existing arrangement that would have historically been in place with the city. So the revision here allows the group to continue forward with the pension plan as expected, and they'll be provided long-term disability benefits just through a new plan with EPCOR.
Thank you, Mr. Schoberg. Are there any questions or comments on the report? It's very straightforward. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have a communication from Mr. Brian Black on the from the Whitmore Park Community Association. Moving to seconder, please. Councillor Price. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, Councillor Flagel on the main report.
Thank you. CR 14-134, status update on enforcement of new residential homestay regulations are as follows: that the administration be directed to continue standard bylaw enforcement procedures for residential homestay. That the administration also provide a report back in quarter number 4 of 2015 outlining options for target licensing for R1 single-family home zones. Keep in mind congregated living arrangements and have public engagement as part of the review of options. And we recommend concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Seconder for the report, please. Okay, Councillor O'Donnell. Comments, questions on this report? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I should first say Councillor Young's been very involved with this, and she's not able to be here tonight, but I know she wishes she could be to speak to this. My personal thoughts, what we're doing right now, I think really misses the mark. Ultimately, regulation is about keeping people safe. Right now, if somebody wants to do a homestay like an Airbnb, rent a room out for people coming in for a rider game or something, they're doing it illegally unless they apply for, I think it's about a $2,400 permit, something like that, over $2,000 to be permitted. That's all well and good. I think it kind of misses the mark when rental properties in Regina, which there's over 20,000 rental properties, about 1 in 3 houses in Regina is a rental property. We have no regulation whatsoever. I live in the Heritage neighborhood. My wife and I came home late Saturday night 2 weeks ago to a fire on the next block on Montreal Street. That's the 4th house on that block that's burnt since we've lived in the neighborhood. 4 houses, all rentals. Well, luckily no one died in this instance, but we have a broader issue as far as ensuring safety of people. So to be so focused on residential homestays, it really misses the mark. I wish the review we get back. It's not going to happen until I think 4th quarter 15. I wish we could do it sooner. It's a very necessary thing. So I'm planning to support this motion. I wish it was sooner, but it's important that when we have those options come back, that we get it right. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Fundura.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a problem with one thing. When we go and inspect and we try to get into contact with the owner, I have a little problem with this because we don't get in, we leave a letter in the mailbox, and then a week later we put another letter out, and after that we just totally close the case. So my question would be to the administration. I know we're going to be looking at this. When do we reopen the case that we've closed? Or is that closed and we don't go back to the houses that we're trying to get into? To Your Worship.
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, I will defer that to Mr. Paulson with respect to how enforcement proceedings take place.
Through the chair, the file is closed if there's no evidence to support further action on the file. So there will be an assessment of the exterior of the building. There will be a look at all of the any of the obvious indicators, and if there's nothing to support continued investigation, the file would be closed. It would be reopened if further information or complaints were received.
Okay, well, we can't get in. We don't know what's, to your worship, we don't know what's in that building. We don't have any complaints from the owner. So there must be something wrong there if he doesn't want to let us in. So that's my, I'm a little bit stuck on that we just bypassed that. We had about 21 properties that we have inspected, or 21 properties that we're not able to get contact from the resident. So that's about, I don't know, about 10%. And residents are asking that, where's the protection for the neighborhood? We have a whole bunch of parking issues, bylaws, and all that, and residents getting punished for all that. But yet, we're trying to make a contact with the owner of the property, and we can get in. So I know I'm okay with it for now, but I think when we come back, I'd like to see a little bit more on why is it that we cannot get in. What's the problem that we can't get into houses? What power do we have? Like we're talking about having teeth, and we don't have them. What's the bylaw? So I will be supporting this because I want to see further report on that. And residents in the neighborhood are asking. This falls a little short of protecting the neighborhood. Just because we can't get in, okay, we'll close the case and we're gone. So I think I've heard that we will not reopen until someone else. So does this have to be a complaint from a neighborhood to reopen again? Is that what the process is? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Paulson, please.
Through the chair, that is correct. We would have to have a secondary complaint to reopen.
Okay. Because the residents are asking, so I'll pass that on. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councilor Fundura. Councilor Bryce?
So the message I'm getting from tonight's meeting is, if you're doing something wrong against a bylaw, just don't open your door. Then you won't be getting a ticket for your noise. You won't be getting into trouble for this. So how do we change that so that people who aren't following bylaws are getting in trouble for it? Mr. Mayor?
I'll give it to the Deputy City Manager to answer.
Mr. Chair, I'll ably defer that to our city solicitor. I believe that there's some legal implications.
To the solicitor, please. And don't duck this one either.
Your Worship, as we've advised the Committee and Council many times when this issue has come up previously, our powers to enter private residences are set out in the Cities Act, and it's a two-stage process. We request a resident to give us access by consent of the resident, or we obtain a warrant from a court to give us legal authority to enter a private dwelling. So those are the two ways that we can get in. So in terms of trying to investigate bylaw infractions that involve investigating residential properties, those are the two legal criteria that we are bound to follow in order to carry out our investigations.
How often do they open the Cities Act to look at the Cities Act, and is this something that we can ask have reviewed?
Mr. Brewery?
We could, this is sort of standard language that you see across the country, and it also comes from the criminal justice system as well. These are sort of standard criteria that are in place for private dwellings. So is there a possibility that we could get additional powers built into the Cities Act? That would be something that we would have to approach the province to implement, but that would be, it's not, in my understanding is it's not common in other jurisdictions to have expanded powers for these types, for investigating these types of offenses. We do have an ability to go on to commercial properties because of the nature of the activity that's going on there. So in terms of doing fire investigations for smoke detectors and other types of fire compliance, whether it's a restaurant or a commercial building or an industrial building, those are not residential properties, so we have more expanded powers. But in terms of residential dwellings, it's more restricted. We could seek legislative amendments to the Cities Act, but these are pretty standard procedures and standard legal requirements.
Just to add to that, in terms of process, the province from time to time will ask for to hear amendments on a particular act, like the city's act, and invite comments back. The other way is that through SUMA, there's a critical mass of municipalities that want to make a change, and they ask the province to open up that act. So those are the two classical ways to do that. If we were to do this, we would do it through perhaps our colleagues on SUMA to raise the issue with the board and try to get it happening that way. But those are the two ways. The province opens the act up and asks for consultation, or we just simply ask them and they agree to do it.
Thank you. So what do other cities across Canada do? I don't know who wants to answer this, Mr. Mayor again. What do other cities across Canada do when people aren't following bylaws? Do they say those who don't open the door don't get a ticket or don't get charged? Mr. Mayor?
Well, Mr. Schober, you may want to attempt that one. I can add some context later.
Absolutely. Your Worship, I'd actually ask Mr. Paulson to speak to that in terms of our experience in other jurisdictions.
Through the chair, it's an issue across Canada, and the enforcement of bylaws in residential type applications. Everybody struggles with it. We're doing some evaluation on best practices, and looking at some proactive planning over the winter so that we're ready to go in the spring to start to try and deal with some of this stuff more effectively.
Thank you. To me, this is frustrating. If we can't have people open their doors, if they know they don't have to open their doors, we have no way to enforce a bylaw. We're all wasting our times here making bylaws then. And I find that really frustrating. So we need to do something different in order to have, I'll use the comment again, to have teeth to some of these bylaws. There's no sense having them if we can't enforce them.
Councillor Hawkins. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Murray, then Councillor Hawkins.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. One of the tools that we do have is the Housing Standards Enforcement Team, which is a organization where we bring together a number of organizations, so bylaw, police, fire, the province and community come together, and we find those homes that are most challenging to the system, Your Worship. So there may be a way that we could utilize some of the tools that we do have, and that enforcement team may be an option for us. And again, there may be an option to increase maybe some of the powers if we had other tools in place. So as an example, maybe if we had a system where rental properties were registered. You have to register your rental property. It becomes part of a scheme that we can follow the quality of housing that's being provided, and maybe it requires an annual or a biannual, whatever it is, inspection. If we had a requirement like that, is that something to our legal side? I'm wondering, Your Worship, is that an option? If we had rental properties registered with the city and had to have annual, biannual inspections, is that something that would allow us to have access to those properties as they are now operating as technically a business?
Mr. Murray?
That's something we could look at as giving, in some instances, what that gives you access to is records. May not give you access to the residents, but at least gives you some expanded enforcement powers that allow you to build the case more effectively. So I'm not sure it's a complete answer, but we certainly could look at that as part of a review. A registry does create another degree of regulation that does help, if it's appropriate to impose that that system.
I mean, Your Worship, we do have some requirements of rental properties. If you have a rental property, you must have a hardwired smoke detector, and as Chief Paulson would explain, that protects those residents, and that really is why we have bylaws. We're there to protect those people who are living in these homes, and we want to make sure that A, they're reaching a minimum standard, and B, that they're safe for people. So I would encourage that we review this further, and that we look for alternatives and opportunities for us to get in there. We see there's a lot of properties that do need the attention, and obviously need to be brought to our attention so that we can get people living in better quality places. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Bryce and Councillor Murray have made important suggestions here. I don't think it's adequate for us just to say that we can do nothing. Otherwise, we should get out of the business of making bylaws. I have a third suggestion. If what's required is a warrant, I think we should be much more aggressive in seeking warrants. If we can show on an application for a warrant that the safety of citizens is at danger, I think that there's some chance that we'll get those warrants. But I think a much more aggressive litigation strategy is necessary, both to protect the integrity of our bylaws and to protect our citizens.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Burnett?
Thank you, Worship. Just a thought, since we're sort of brainstorming here in terms of what powers and authorities, I think back to that article with parking tickets. I think it was someone owned like $35,000, and I believe we have the authority to impound their car, sell it, and get the money back. Do we have authorities where we could maybe have a bad neighbor clause? And pretty strict criteria to be labeled that, but it comes a point where the cost factor of sending out police and our parking enforcement and bylaw enforcement gets to a point where it gets ridiculous on us, and I agree that we have to do something, because right now all we hear is that our hands are tied. But maybe if we could just go after the pocketbook and put it on the tax notice or some way just to hit them hard on the fine. We're just recovering costs here, because there's got to be something, because I do like the concept, like with the parking tickets, that we can, like say, take away their car, sell it, and pay off the bill and give them whatever residual amount is left. And I don't know if you can impound the house and sell it and then get our money back, but there's a horrendous cost and tax or cost of taxpayers' money here. So I just throw that out as another suggestion or idea.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Donnell?
Thanks. So we have an opportunity to do a couple of things. One is that if you so wish to take a motion forward to SUMA, I'd be happy to take it forward on your behalf. By the way, I dealt with resolutions yesterday, so this would have to be an emergent one. On the floor at SUMA, we have two opportunities. One is that we meet as cities, and heaven forbid we have some common issues that we could talk with. This could be one that we could put on there, and I suggest it would be an appropriate one, and I don't believe that we're the only people having this discussion. So there's a couple of opportunities, of course, on the floor. But by the way, we are a creature, we've said this many times, we are a creature of the province, so legislation has to be in agreement. So we can always, on the floor at SUMA, ask the appropriate minister, by the way, how do you feel about this? So there's many ways to make our point. I want to be respectful on the other side as well. I went with a group of people a number of years ago who were from health, from fire, from police, from our bylaw enforcement, and me. And there were, what I figured out at that point in time, based on watching them and listening to them, was there are certain people who have access, and health was one. Health has a ton of power, all due respect. Fire has a ton of power. I'll tell you who didn't go in the house was the police. He was not welcome. He didn't ask to go in, and he stayed outside. He talked to the nice resident from the doorway, and I only got in the house because I asked the gentleman if I may. There are reasons why people can't go in the house, and we can't be, you know, the big brother all the time just barging down the door and going in. So let's be respectful. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know the law, but I do know that federally and provincially, not just our province and not our city, have similar rules that handle this situation. So I know that Mr. Linford, when he came, and other people that we've all dealt with, have issues with this, but there's another situation that's here. Having said that, I invite you to work through SUMA.
Okay. I just want to point out to members of council, of course, the second recommendation, and this is by Councillor Young, a report back on targeted licensing, what that means. And that could be another avenue, and indeed that is what the Executive Committee has asked for, a report back on the fourth quarter of next year. That is another angle that this council has asked to do, and we'll see where that gets us, whether it gets in the door or not. So that's the second recommendation. No other speakers on the report. I'm going to call the question on this report. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We have bylaws now. Councillor Flego.
Thank you. I have four, and if you're all okay with this, I'll do them all at once, or anybody have an issue with that? Good.
We're all aware of what these are about, the noise abatement, the cemeteries, the civic employee superannuation, and the long-term disability.
Perfect. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Murray, that bylaw 2014-50, 80, 84, and 85 be introduced and read a first time.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Mr. Ray, you...
Your Worship, I just bring to your attention that based on the recommendation in the LTD report, there's no need to table 2014-85.
Okay.
So please delete that.
Okay. A motion to table 85?
So,
O'Donnell, seconder. Councilor Murray, all those in favor? Opposed, carries. So we'll just do 50, 80, and 84.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor O'Donnell, that bylaws 2014-50, 80, and 84 be read a second time.
Any comments on this? All those in favor? Opposed, carried.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Findura, that council hereby consent to bylaw number 2014-50, 80, and 84, going to a third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried unanimously.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Fraser, that bylaws 2014-50, 80, and 84 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Executive Committee reports. 135, the Fire Service Agreement. Councilor Flagel.
Thank you. I rise again, CR 14-135, and this is a recommendation of Executive Committee that the Deputy City Manager and City Operations Officer be authorized to resolve and approve the final terms and conditions of a definitive fire services agreement between the City of Regina and the Global Transportation Hub Authority based on the general and key commercial terms and conditions as outlined in the report. And again, that the city clerk be authorized to execute the fire service agreement after review by the city solicitor. Concurrence was given.
Seconder for that? Councilor Findura. Any comments on the report? Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. I'm clear that this is about the Global Transportation Hub, but this is some new terminology and a new form. Can I ask first, would this type of, or structure, maybe that's the word, would the structure of this agreement be applicable if we were to enter into any other fire services agreement?
Mr. Schoberg.
Your Worship, I'd ask or Chief Paulson to respond to that.
Mr. Paulson, Chief Paulson, please.
Through the chair, the agreement that we've developed here will be applied. The principles will be applied to any other agreement, fire protection agreement or mutual aid that we enter into in terms of fire protection.
So if I may be specific, if an adjacent RM wanted to use our services, if there was issues along the highway, if there was businesses out of town that needed our assistance, would this agreement serve those things?
Mr. Paulson?
Through the chair, yes.
Perfect. Yes. Love this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Donnell. Other speakers? It's about time we got the report in. That's excellent to have it here. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. This is appointments to the ROC Committee, 136.
CR 14-136 is, yes, it is the 2015 appointment to the ROC committees. These are all one-year terms. Mr. Murad Al-Katab, Neil Donnelly, Tony Coppola, Rick Krieger, and Frank Hart have all put their names forward for a one-year term ending December 31st, 2015, starting January 1st, 2015. That all the members continue to hold an office for the term indicated or until successors are appointed or resignations, et cetera, et cetera. So
seconder for that, please.
Concurrence is given.
Thank you, Seconder. Councilor Murray. Speakers to the report. Councilor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. These are all very able people. I support these recommendations. I think, to give a bit of context to this, ROC is in the middle of developing a strategic plan. They're anxious to keep the board that's currently in place developing that plan in place for another year so that their work can be completed. I think that the plan looks very good, and I'm very encouraged that that board will stay in place. I rise to make a more general point. I think it is important that boards and agencies of the cities reflect a proper or appropriate gender balance. This applies generally across the board. I'll be making this point as other nominations come forward. I'm not talking about a quota system here. I don't believe in a quota system. What I'm saying is that I think that there are very, very many able women in the city who could be encouraged to sit on our boards. I think there are boards where the representation is inadequate, and I want to make sure and state publicly that I think that we should work on making sure that there's an appropriate gender balance in all our boards. That said, I'm happy to support these recommendations for the reasons given. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawkins. Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. I rise to make the same point. I actually made note that only 30% of this membership for this board was female, and I was hoping that we would look in the future to have a more diverse group.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Point well taken. Other comments on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll move on to Finance Administration. Lease Road right-of-way. Councillor Murray.
Thanks, Your Worship. I rise to bring forward CR 14-137, and this is the lease of road right-of-way. And the recommendations coming from Finance Administration are three parts: that a lease agreement between the City of Regina and CBS Outdoor Canada LP be approved for subject of road right-of-way properties, incorporating the terms and conditions as outlined within the body of this report, and that the Your Administration be authorized to approve the final terms and conditions of the lease agreements, and that the City Clerk be authorized to execute those lease documents prepared by the City Solicitor, and a fourth part, that the City Solicitor be instructed to prepare bylaws for considering City Council authorizing a lease of subject road right-of-ways. So if I can have a seconder.
Seconder for that, please. Councillor Flegel.
Thanks, Councillor Flegel. Basically, these are sites where signage would go up, advertising signage, and we see them all over the place. There's a number of sites that are listed in the appendix, and there was just some minor changes made to those. There was a little bit of discussion about locations of some of them, but that was what's coming forward from the committee, and we asked for approval. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Flegel.
Thanks. I wanted to speak to this one real briefly because I know that we're not allowed to, because we go through elections, we know all the signages, where they should be and shouldn't be. And over the past year or two, there was some signage that has gone on to the Louvain, which is considered the Queen's Way, and nothing is allowed inside the fence area. And there was signage at Harbour Landing at, I forget if it's Gord Staceyson or whatever, it's a 16 by 20, and it was there for over a year. And according to what I was told with admin, there was a deal cut with the developer at the time, and they eventually got pulled out of there because it was an oops, wasn't supposed to happen. Just wondering if, Councillor Murray, if making sure, are all these going to be, are these the cement post ones and the lit 25 feet in the air, and they won't be on any of the Queen's Way, or, because we're all getting penalized when that happens during elections, and we go through this with First Avenue North, the same thing. Everybody wants everywhere, but we got to just make sure. Is that the case?
Well, we can defer to the administration, but basically, yeah, these are all locations where the warrants we've gone through, and these sites do allow for, and we have ensured that we've found locations, and they're in Appendix A, and there's a number of them there that you can take a look at them and see right where they're at. There are other signs near or around similar locations like these, so these are they do fit within the requirements of the bylaw. But if there's anything else, maybe Ms. Harlock, yeah, she agrees. So that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Flegel. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, are these lit signs that are some of those ones that are animated? They're just solid signs.
They're currently not lit digital ones, but they could become in the future if there was an application brought forward on them.
Okay, I just have concerns about the lighting and the brightness, but I know we do have bylaws enforced. Are we enforcing those bylaws for the brightness of signs?
Ms. Harlock.
Through your worship, we do have regulations regarding those, and if there is complaints, then we would look into enforcing those requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to give a bit of background to this. This matter was before the Finance and Administration Committee. I asked the administration there, and I'm going to ask them again, what the criteria are for allocating signs.
Ms. Harlock.
Through your worship, if a billboards have to be located within 30 meters of a building, and no part of the billboard shall be located closer to the street than the front of the building. They have to be located on a private property and shall not be located in a site triangle. And where one or more billboard is located closer than 90 meters to another billboard, they can't be facing the same direction. And if the height is over 7.6 meters, they do need to be certified by a professional engineer.
Thank you very much. And I asked further at Finance and Admin whether aesthetic considerations played any role in the allocation of billboard sign locations, and how that fit with complete neighborhoods, protecting neighborhoods, under the official community plan. And as I understood the answer, that is not currently the focus of the criteria. The focus of the criteria currently is public safety, road safety, and that kind of thing. I just want to confirm with administration that that's the case.
That is correct at this time. That is not a consideration.
Your Worship, Councillors, I think it's important that when we allocate billboard signs that we protect against billboard pollution, against billboard clutter. We removed one sign location at Finance and Administration out of that concern. The location was near 25th and Albert. I think that's an important consideration. I think that before we approve any signs, billboard signs, they should be looked at by planning, and not just for safety, but not only for safety, but for aesthetic considerations as well. I'll bring forward at another council meeting a request for a report to enable us to do that. I understand that the zoning bylaws to be reviewed. I understand that the time horizon for that review is 3 to 5 years. I'm concerned that this is a little more pressing than that, so I'll bring that forward at a later time. I just want to say that I support this motion now, but I want to put on the table the idea that we need to be concerned about billboard clutter, about billboard pollution going forward. Thank you.
Other speakers?
I actually wasn't going to say anything, but I will. I'm going to respond to something Councillor Hawkins said. If I'd have been on council 25 years ago and the city was a different place, one of the hopes that I would have had at that time is that we would have no billboards. I'm going to give you the example of Tempe, Arizona, and Fountain Hills, Arizona. I happen to have gone there. Every sign is low to the ground, 2 or 3 feet. So if you want to go to your grocery store, you go by, you just look straight out your front window and you'll see a sign. You don't have them up, and there are no video screens. Actually, that's the way I wish we had it.
Thank you, Councillor Dowell. Councillor Fraser?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I actually plan to vote against this one. I think advertising is important. We should be clear on that. I've used advertising for campaign stuff before. I'm not above using advertising. We also need to understand that advertising is a tax, actually. It's a sales tax. You buy something, you pay PST, you pay GST, and part of what you pay pays for the advertising that brought you in the store in the first place. So, without regulation, we just get more and more advertising. Also, I really appreciate Councillor Hawkins' point about review of placement. It seems right now our guidelines are mostly about traffic safety, very important, but neighborhood aesthetic, it seems, isn't necessarily taken into context at all. The example that really gets under my skin is with the fire hall in Heritage. It's our best building, maybe. It's one of the best heritage buildings, surely, in all the city. The view that is best able to appreciate the building is from Broad Street, but you can't see it because there's a billboard in the way. So you get to look at a Tim Hortons ad instead of seeing what really is a gem of the city, To me, that's just not, we need to sort of think that out when we're going through this. Another thing, and I'll be clear, this is just, it's late at night, this is really a rant out in left field, so the point being that, when a box store moves to town, God bless them, but it's at the expense of many local businesses. And it seems we have a process to put up signs. We don't have any enforcement about keeping your sign well lit. If you drive down any street in Regina, it's so easy to find burnt-out signs. And I've brought up before that, the sort of idea of a box store moving to town, again, at the expense of some local businesses and not keeping their sign lit is sort of like wearing sweatpants to a funeral. So that's the end of my rant. I plan to vote against this, and we're almost done here. Thanks.
Councillor Foy, can you take the chair for a moment, please? Actually, if you're more than you'd be
Go
able
ahead,
to.
Mayor, you have 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
I have, that was
8
actually
seconds.
on someone else's speaking. So I was hoping that Councillor Hawkins would have pursued this further, because I think that we need to get some clarity. And I know that some of the work I've done, research I've done through my office, that other communities like Saskatoon doesn't have nearly as many signs as we have. So I would like to see a report back to Community Protective Services?
Finance.
To Finance Administration, that would do a couple of things. It would look at a way to introduce criteria beyond public safety, aesthetics, numbers, and bring back a policy statement for council to look at ultimately. and also as a revenue stream, because I think in some of these larger signs, there's an annual fee, but there's an awful lot of revenue that's generated, of course, by the use of the signs. So I really think we need to look at this, given if you look at only strictly the criteria of public safety, that's good. There's a much larger picture here. We have a lot of signs compared to other cities, and we need to look at that. So my motion would be that we review the current criteria used for signs, permanent signs, and we come back with it with some criteria beyond public safety to look at the community itself, aesthetic value of it, and sheer numbers. So that can be evaluated and discussed at Finance Administration, then at Council. I have a seconder for that.
Second, Councillor Hawkins, go ahead.
That's it. I just think we need to have another look at this. I think we just simply have too many in the city.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay. See how fast I am?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh.
Can I speak? Through Mr. Chairman, because it has to do with the zoning bylaw and the regulations with respect to the zoning bylaw, it should, the committee should be coming to RPC because they regulate the zoning bylaw. It went to Finance and Admin specifically because it was lease of lands that we own.
So then it would be to Planning Commission.
Okay.
Also, just some clarification around timing. We are doing the zoning bylaw review and doing an analysis of what parts of the zoning bylaw we're going to tackle first. So I would suggest.
I think Mr. Searle may have a lot of this information already in hand, so I would think you give a time frame, but I think I'd rather do it sooner rather than later. I know you're doing part of a larger bylaw review, but I do think this is important too.
What kind of timeline are we looking at?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would say that by Q2, that would give us the time.
Okay, after April.
It's an amendment.
It's an amendment, just an amendment.
It's not a referral, it's an amendment.
So we need to vote. Do you have speakers on the amendment?
Point of order, I think we have the floor open now, so anybody who wants to speak to this?
Yes.
And if I could, just on point of order, if you don't mind, sorry. Just on point of order, I want you to know that when I walked in the room tonight, Councillor Hawkins asked me about how to handle this in a motion, and I gave him the advice to bring a motion forward to a December meeting. So I just want to make sure that I'm not using my time, but I just want to make on a point of order. Thank you.
That was a point of order one? Okay. We'll let that, Councillor Hawkins, go ahead. Do you want me to carry on here? Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank Councillor O'Donnell for his advice, and I appreciate that both Councillor O'Donnell and the Mayor, by a wealth of experience, understand the procedures of council better than I do, and you know, as a first-time councillor, it's just really important to me to have that advice, and I appreciate it very much. I think that the Mayor's motion exactly captures the concern that I had in making my comments, and I'm pleased to see it move forward, and I'll look forward to the report. One other thing the report might consider saying is why these things go to Finance Admin when in fact they are really a planning matter.
It's lease, yeah, it's because it's property. I think, isn't it? It's because it's leased property, financing,
I
money?
see perhaps so that some rationalization is necessary in that when they look at this, they can maybe look at that consideration.
Okay. We still want to just speak to the amendment, please. Yeah. Councillor O'Donnell, go ahead.
Thanks very much. So I would just like, within the work that the administration is going to do, that they look at a timeline. In other words, if you get an agreement to put a sign up, does that mean forever? So to me, there's a place where things change. We have density on 23rd Avenue. If there was a billboard there on that, does that mean it can never come down because? So to me, that there's a notion here of time, and that it might also, from my point of view, give us the opportunity to serve notice on existing signage that can come down.
To his, Ms. Harlock, to his question, is there a timeline on lease contracts today?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I will defer that to Mr. Barr in terms of the timelines for leases, but if it is a billboard that's approved, that's separate, that's not on lease land, there is no timelines. It's a permit that's issued.
Okay. Mr. Barr?
The leases we have in place are typically 5 years, and so, and I believe we have, besides these 8 that are in front of you, there's about another 7 leases that we have across the city. So the bulk of the signages are on private property, not on public property.
Thank you. Good. Mayor, do you want to add to the amendment?
Just to close debate, I appreciate...
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
Yes.
Your closed debate on the main report. I raised this issue in amendment because Councilor Hawkins couldn't speak twice on the same issue, and I felt we should talk about it tonight. I realize that there's other times to put motions forward, but I think now that the report's before us, and he had spoken once and couldn't do it again, let's get it on the floor for discussion. Thank you.
So we need to vote on the amendment only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Back to the main motion.
Other speakers before we get to Councilor Flake to close debate?
Point of order. So as it stands right now, this would okay these 9 billboards and also ask for
That's correct. What's been added is simply a report to come back on a review.
Okay.
That's correct. Councilor Murray?
Yeah, if I can, I'll just...
Would you want to speak, Councilor Flake? Okay.
Very shortly, just want to ask if Mr. Barr could tell me that these are on private property. Do we assess the value of those signs and the structure that's there? Are they taxed, and is that a revenue generator for the city?
Mr. Barr?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these aren't taxed. The land is leased, and it's very small areas of land. And the revenue we do get is from the lease amounts that we charge on the signs.
Okay, so do we own the sign then? That's why we get the revenue for it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we own the land and we lease the land. And so the sign companies would put up the sign, the foundations for the sign, and maintain the signs.
So that's on public land, but the asset of the sign belongs to the company. Can we not assess that asset and tax it?
Through Mr. Chair, or through Your Worship, the current legislation doesn't have a specific ability to tax the signs. It's typically talks about buildings and structures, and this would be more along the lines of equipment in terms of the definitions in the Act.
Okay, no, that's good. I just was curious if there was a way that could generate additional revenue. I appreciate that the gross lease rate showing here is just over $20,000 a year. Again, you have to balance that again with the aesthetics of the community. So I do appreciate the discussion. I think it's important that we've had that discussion. And just as a by the way, there was reference to our sister city to the north not having as many signs. This application is coming from a Saskatoon-based company putting up signs here. So we're winning, I guess. Thanks.
We're getting something anyway. Councilor Murray's closed debate, so I'll ask for a vote on this. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we'll move on to our next report. This is Councilor Murray again.
Oh, thank you very much. I was going to jump to the next report, and I'm bringing forward, this is CR 14-138. This is in reference to 1555 8th Avenue. The recommendations coming from administration in the report were discussions around whether or not the land could be sold or leased and continued leased. It's under currently a lease, and so the recommendation from the committee is simply receive and file. Thanks, Your Worship.
Seconder for that, please. Councilor Flagel, any comments or questions on this? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Fraser, go ahead.
It's an unfortunate situation. In my mind, the most clear-cut and sort of fair thing to do is to sell the property at fair market value. I just would ask, if that happens, where does the money go? Like, will it be put back into recreational facilities, or it goes back into, I'm not sure.
Ms. Harlack?
Through Your Worship, I defer that to Mr. Barr.
Mr. Barr.
Through Your Worship, all sales of real estate go through the Real Estate Costing Fund, and at the end of the year, any assets or any extra funds would be moved to the Land Development Reserve, and then through the annual process that the city does look at the balance as well, the reserves.
Okay, so it could be used on it goes into a fund, so ultimately that fund is used for a wide variety of different things, including recreational facilities. Is that right?
Mr. Barr?
Through your worship, of course, council has the ability to look at all the funds that are, all the reserve funds, so there's ways to do that.
Okay, again, this is we're trying to make the best of an unfortunate situation through this, and to me, that's sort of what's most fair and transparent, is to sell the building and to keep it in mind that this building would have otherwise been used for a recreational facility. It could have been. So we can't necessarily directly earmark the money, but for us to keep that in mind, that the value of this, in principle, should be put towards other recreational facility. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Fraser. Other speakers? Councilor O'Donnell?
Thanks. So I'm not clear. I have a receive and file in front of me, and it tells me that we could keep leasing it or we could sell it, but there's no recommendation here. Am I on track here? Good. So I'll move a motion, if I'm right. If I'm right.
You can do that, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to move motion.
As long as it's not contrary to the main motion.
No, sell. I would like to, my offer is that we sell.
Seconder for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Motion on the floor is to sell the property. Pretty clear what's being asked here. Do I have any other speakers? Any comment by the administration on this? Because the report was unclear on direction.
Through your worship, I'd ask Mr. Barr to
Mr. Barr?
provide.
Through your worship, the purpose of the report here is when this issue came before council, when we took back the property, council was concerned about two things, one being the impact it has on the existing tenant, and the other the impact it has on the gymnastic clubs that were formerly using the facility, and then after that we're receiving funding through the OGAR organization. So this report is to follow up on that, the request of council to bring information forward on the impact to the tenant and to the gymnastic clubs. And so as the report points out that in terms of impact for the tenant, the property could be sold and the new landlord would, the tenant would have to deal with the new landlord, or if the city retained the property, the tenant would still have to deal with the city in terms of the lease renewal. We are in discussions with the current occupants to see if there is a potential of them purchasing it as well, so that's another option that we are working on.
Other speakers on the motion? Councilor Fundura?
Just a question to your worship. If we are putting this on and selling it, are we just looking at a tenant now? Because this is already established building there. So what are we talking about here, to your worship? Like, we're putting it out to the general bids, or what's the angle here, to your worship?
Well, the motion, unless Councilor O'Donnell wants to add to it, it's on face value to find an opportunity to sell the property. But not a lot of strings attached to it.
So just the question here is just sale. That's it. No other.
Yeah, be fair market value, of course.
But this motion is just for sale, right? There's nothing else involved in that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Hawkins?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councilor O'Donnell is right. The report doesn't deal with these issues. My concern is that I don't know whether this is an advantageous time to sell. I don't know whether any analysis has been done on what an appropriate sale price would be. I don't know whether it would be more financially advantageous to the city, for the city to sell now or to continue with a lease. That might depend on interest rates. It might depend on a whole variety of things. I'm a little concerned that I simply don't have enough information tonight to know what the proper disposition of this land should be, and I'm further concerned that before we take a step like this, a recommendation from the administration would be helpful. I'd be more than content to see this matter come back to this council very early on in the new year so that not much time is lost, but with more information and more guidance to help us through what is really quite a complicated matter of dealing with land disposition. Thank you.
Other speakers? Councilor Bryce?
I'm actually not sure why this is here. It actually says in it, the city has a process for examining options for disposal or continued ownership of property. So why do we have it here today versus a recommendation whether we should sell or lease this?
Mr. Barr?
Through your worship, the report as it outlines, it was in response to a request from council when we purchased the property to bring back a report to talk about the impact on the tenants and on the gymnastics clubs. So that's the purpose of the report. As the report points out, we do have a process in terms of reviewing all of our property, the surplus property, whether we maintain it, whether we have a future use for it, or whether to sell it. And it includes things like the condition of the property, the appraised value, and other potential uses we have for it. In this case, there is a lease until 2017, so there would be no potential of civic use for this for at least that time frame.
So we can't actually sell it till 2017 is what you're telling me, through you, Mr. Mayor?
Through your worship, it's possible to sell it with the lease in place, and the new owner would just have to honor the lease.
Okay. I'm just a little concerned. I agree with Councillor Hawkins. I'm not sure if I have enough information to just say, let's sell it. I would prefer a referral back to administration to see what our opportunities are and then move forward based on the information we get. So would it be appropriate to make a referral motion, or is that contrary to the motion?
It's not contrary. A referral motion, you can do that. It's not contrary to the motion.
It's not contrary?
It's not contrary.
Okay, so I'll make an amendment to make a referral motion for this to go back to administration to look at, see what our options are. I'll just ask for some guidance of a timeline of when we could have this back here at council.
Ms. Warlock?
Through your worship, probably at the end of Q2, we'll take it, do our analysis and bring it back through finance and admin and then through to council.
Okay, thank you. That's my motion.
Okay, that's a referral motion. Just on a point of clarification, Councillor Hawkins, there's no debating a referral motion.
He's seconding it.
Were you seconding it? Okay. Okay. All clear on the referral? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Good. Move on to Councillor Bryce. This would be landfill fees.
Bring forward CR 14-139, which is the City of Regina landfill fees for 2015. I'm pleased to say that the landfill fees for 2015 shall remain the same as 2014. If I can get a seconder, I'll just speak to the... Thank you. Rationale is the projected increase to the volume of materials without increasing the tipping fees for 2015 will offset any effect of inflation on the operating costs, resulting in no significant impact on the operating surplus.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Comments on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Planning Commission. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. This is 14-140, application for discretionary use, proposed house form, commercial office, 2160 Scarth. Remember last time I told you I always like to tell you a story and about discussion. This is the second one. No discussion, no story. Thought this was good. And we may also get a basin suite out of this as well. Looking for concurrence.
Seconder for the report, please. Councillor Flego. Discussion on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Information report on the report on the city debt. Mover for that, please.
I'll move the recommended disposition of the report, Your Worship.
Thank you. Seconder for that, please. Councillor Burnett. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The last one is a communication for the Mayor's Housing Commission, a nomination. A motion for that?
Worship, I can move the communication. It's simply just declaring Mr. Dave McEachran as replacing Terry Canning on the Mayor's Housing Commission.
Seconder for that, please. Okay. Councillor Hawkins, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Seconder. Councillor Murray, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone.